Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to our study session here on April 17th in beautiful morning in Mesa, Arizona. Hope you're enjoying the morning. This morning, we will review and discuss items on our agenda for April 21st. And so, Council, if you look over the agenda for Monday's council meeting, if you have any questions, we know who to ask.
I have one.
Pretty light agenda, but go ahead. Yes, Vice Mayor.
So item 8 and item 7C, they're a little bit different in that item 7C, we're looking to designate the city manager to be able to eliminate some easements and right-of-ways that we no longer need. So that makes sense because that's going to save applicants 4 to 8 weeks of time. What's interesting, 8A is kind of the opposite of that. It's a map of dedication staff report for dedicating those easements. What I get 7A, so I guess the question would be for item 8, why don't we designate the city manager to be able to do this? Why does this have to come to city council?
So, I'll say 8A, and it's similar in concept to subdivision plats, and that process is being changed in the city code, and we're drafting that. And so I think in the future, you're going to see.
So we could do this too.
So it won't even go to the city manager, it'll go through the planning department process. And so that code change, I think, is going to come to council here in a few months.
We're hoping to get that to council before the break, Vice Mayor.
Excellent, all right. We save some development, some time. And money. Thank you.
Council, any other questions? All right, looks like we're good. So then we'll move over to item 2A, presentation on the overall fiscal year 2026 to 2030 capital improvement program. Brian and Chris.
Good morning, Mayor, Council. Brian Ritchell, Director of the Office of Management and Budget, and alongside me I have Chris Lynch. He is the coordinator over the budget coordinator over the CIP area within the operations or within the Office of Management and Budget. So today's presentation is really just an overview of the capital improvement program for fiscal year, the 5 years for the fiscal years 26 through 30. And what this focuses on is really the bond projects that the city has, and really focusing, going a little bit deeper into projects completed in fiscal year 24-25, current CIP projects, projects starting in fiscal year 25-26, which will be the budget coming forward. And then also other projects that are in need of funding. So this isn't, just a reminder, this is not a complete list of all the projects that are happening, just to highlight some of those that are happening around the city. So just to step back a little bit, first off, I'd like to give an overview of kind of the capital improvement program. So the program is really a planning document. It allows the city to schedule and allocate financial resources to address infrastructure needs. And internally, what we do is we do an 8-year plan. We develop an 8-year plan to see where those needs are, what the resources are that are coming available, and what projects we may be able to put in that plan. Unfunded projects remain part of the plan, but so as we review on a yearly basis, we can see which ones that we can now fund or which ones stay unfunded. The 5-year plan that comes to council for approval, which is required by the charter, is all of those projects that are funded. So this is a funding plan of that 5-year outlook. And then, as I mentioned, the first year of the funding is what is appropriated as part of the annual budget. So only the 1 year, so coming up fiscal year 25-26 will be the only year budgeted. The rest of the years is really a plan. So moving on to what funds these CIP projects. On the utility side, it's utility revenues. utility revenue obligations. And then also we have a utility taxable obligation, which the city just implemented a few years ago. This one is for the LG Power battery plant that is going in Southeast Mesa. On the non-utility side, the general governmental side, it's local revenues. Also, we receive regional awards and grants. The general obligation bonds is what the voters authorize the city to use. And then also we do have some excise tax obligations that help those projects. The other thing that we consider when formulating this plan is the operations and maintenance of the finished product. So for instance, when we build a new fire station or a new library, what we need to also take in consideration is once we build that building, are we able to operate it and maintain the operations? So what we do is we take a look at when are we able to have the funding available to build it, but then also is the city able to have the resources to sustain those services for that? So some ongoing is staffing of the fire stations or libraries or plants. Also, some one-time is either vehicles or furniture and fixtures that would go into those buildings. Some challenges that the city is facing is similar to last year. Cost overruns, but also delays in getting some of the construction materials. We may be seeing that with the current economic climate that we are seeing with costs, also increased labor costs. Higher than normal inflation on commodity services. We're still seeing a slight increase on inflation than what we've seen in the past. However, with that also, we haven't seen prices drop too much yet from what it was pre-pandemic. And then also keeping up with growth while maintaining current infrastructure. Those are some of the challenges. So what I'd like to now go over is the utility capital improvement program and highlight some of those projects. So completed projects that we have is the Northwest Water Reclamation Plant. They did some pipe replacements. This was an emergency, so this wasn't planned in the previous CIP plans. However, we did have some emergencies that we had to do. Also, the 36-inch reclaimed water main replacement was an emergency. So these are kind of things that, as I said, this is a plan that things change, plans change, and we have to prioritize funding and be able to do some of these emergencies. Also, the Northwest Water Reclamation Water Plant, the second flare, that got completed in 24-25, and then Energy Resources had some new services completed, but then also a Queen Creek Gate Station, which will help with the high volume users in the Magma area. Some current utility CIP projects going on is also for Energy Resources. The Gansell Road is going on for gas. Residents on Main. Also down in the Magma area is the Arizona Farms gas line replacement. This is to help with the larger customers in the future that will be going down in the southeast area. And then also the LG gas line that is currently under construction. On water resources side, we have the Signal Butte Water Plant Phase 2 going on, and then also the Central Mesa Reuse Pipeline, along with some ground wells and some improvements. The combined, as you all aware, the combined of energy and water, we're now in Phase 2 of the smart metering. So moving on to projects that will begin construction in 25-26, so this coming up fiscal year. We have some quarter sections for Energy Resources, but also some new services at the Mesa General Hospital and then Edge on Main. Water has some highlighted here of the water transmission main rehab improvements, but also some new ground wells, new chemical tank plants at the Greenfield plant. That's the one that we co-own with Queen Creek and Gilbert. And then also some improvements at the Southeast Water Reclamation Plant. These are some highlights of some of the projects that will be started in 25-26. So now looking at future projects that are in need of funding, as I mentioned, some of the pressures of the CIP are the cost increases. And so what we have to do is reprioritize the funding for some of the projects that were needed, for instance, those emergencies. Some projects are the Water Transmission Improvements Phase 3, 4, and 5. but also Brown Road Water Treatment Plant. That is in some need of funding. And then also I know they've presented here for water security, purchase of water security for the city itself is the Bartlett Dam and Reservoir expansion. That is a future project that we'll have to see about funding for that. Then on the energy resources side is the Rogers Generation project. Then also a Clausen Gate Phase 2. That is a project down in the Magma area that will also help with larger customers down in that area. So just moving on, just some list of life cycle purchases that the utilities will be looking to purchase in fiscal year 24-25 is some vehicles, water main replacements, water meter replacements, some utility valves, the hydrants, fire hydrants, they're looking to maintain maintenance on those. As you see pictured, they have some compliance lab equipment that's needed and then also some plant equipment. So that's kind of a real brief overview of the utility side of the capital improvements. So moving on, I'll be going over what we call the non-utility capital improvements.
Brian,
Yes.
Council, any questions on the prior presentation? Ms. Pillsbury.
Just kind of a generic question, but on slide 4, when you talk about operations and maintenance, this kind of came up in our conversation last week, or was it, last week, I think, when we were talking about pools with Parks and Rec. So that would just be an example, but do you, with the future, like operation and maintenance costs, I'm assuming that's something just every year you're looking over, like if we're projecting that we can open up the pool in 5 years or 6 years, right? Then we're looking at that every year though, to see when we can get that online. So I'm assuming it could get pushed back or it could get pushed earlier.
Thank you for the question, Mayor, Councilmember Spilsbury. Yes, we look at that on an annual basis. So when we see, for instance, any of the pools or new pools that we're looking to build or any parks, anything like that, we look to see, okay, what funding do we have to do that actual project? But then we look to see what resources or what revenues are coming in, what fund balance do we have to be able to sustain the services and be able to do the operations and maintenance. So we look at that on an annual basis. So if the economy, for instance, reverted back to how we were right at the pandemic when sales tax was coming in really great, we would hypothetically maybe move that up because then we have that ongoing resources to be able to sustain those services. Or if we go into, the economy goes into a recession, then we really have to take a look at those revenues to see, okay, reprioritize. Do we need to push this out? Do we have services that are, that we need to prioritize ahead of that and kind of look at that? But we look at it on an annual basis.
Okay, because obviously the bonds are covering like the structure of it or whatever, but then we've got to make sure we have the funds. So, I mean, do we actually like put it into budgets? I mean, is that what it looks like?
Mayor, Councilmember Spilsbury, no, thank you for the question. So what we do is that 8 years, I mentioned that 8-year plan that we look internally, we look at that and we include the operations and maintenance in that plan. So we look at and we add the construction costs, wherever the construction, design, all of that. But then in that plan, we also put in how much, and we work closely with the departments to see, okay, how much would it be to operate a pool? We'll put that in that plan. And so when we look at that, we look at the total cost of being able to construct that park, that building, whatever that is, but then also to maintain it. And so we look at that as a total package. And so when we come forward with the plan for adoption, you will see some of those operations and maintenance in that plan. So as together with that 5 years.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Adams.
Good morning. 3 questions, and I'll just give them all 3 to you, and then you can go with it. Go a little deeper, please, into, you mentioned excise tax obligations. Can you just give me a little broader view of what that entails? And second one, do we routinely set aside a certain percentage of anything for emergencies, as you mentioned earlier? And the third is, I'm just curious, you refer to some project at Bartlett Dam. Isn't that an SRP obligation, and why are we tied into that. So if you could expand on that a little bit, I'd appreciate it.
Thank you for the questions, Mayor, Councilmember Adams. So the first question was about excise tax obligations. So they are slightly different, and Mr. Kennington, our CFO, can correct me or come up here if I misspeak. But so we have the general obligation bonds, which the voters authorize. We go out for vote and do that as a voter approved for some debt. And it's backed by the full faith of the city, but also any revenues that, that's for the property tax, secondary property tax. So general obligation bonds is funded by secondary property tax only. So excise tax bonds are backed by revenue sources from the city. So that's really the sales tax would pay for those. So any sales tax revenues coming in. So in past, the city has issued some excise tax bonds. One, for instance, believe is Sloan Park. We issued excise tax bonds for that. So we use the city sales tax because I think the philosophy was before my time, but Mr. Brady could correct me if I'm wrong, but the philosophy is that when we build that it would bring in additional sales tax, it would bring in more people. So with that additional sales tax, we would be able to fund the debt service for those projects.
So would that be like a special 1/2 cent sales tax in addition to build something? Or
No, thank you for the question. Mayor, council member, no, we would not go for an extra sales tax. It's really just the current sales tax that we have would pay for the revenues that we generate from that current sales tax. That would pay for the bonding obligation. So what we do is when we look at the forecast, we would see, okay, how much revenue are we getting from sales tax and all of that? And then can the forecast support that debt service?
Mayor and council, we have not used that very often, for funding a spring training facility that we knew was going to generate millions of dollars for the city. We could then issue the debt. We pledge the excise tax, the sales tax to pay off those bonds. We also had some surplus property that we owned in Pinal County. So we were able to commit the excise tax. We ended up paying it off. That debt is already paid off from the sale of land that we had in Pinal County. But when we went to the market, you have to pledge, collateral against the debt. So we pledged the excise tax, which gave us lots of coverage as far as the payment. So we've used it. So it's not very often we use it, but that's a decision council can make. It's not voter approved. But again, we don't use it very often. So it's kind of those ASU, spring training, those are kinds of the facilities. We've used it out at Gateway Airport, where the city has committed to building or help support a large hangar building for one of the big tenants out there. Now they're paying it back through their rent, but initially they needed somebody to build out the capital, but it's all the pledge. The city has to pledge its excise tax, but we have a commitment and they're paying it back through the rent. So it's just another tool in the toolbox we have.
So Mayor.
And then Bartlett Dam, I'll say this, on Bartlett Dam, yes, that's an SRP project, but SRP is, they're looking for the participation of the communities to participate in the eventual cost. Well, we're actually helping to fund a lot of feasibility studies related to Bartlett Dam. So at some point in the future, because we're at the table now and participating, that gives us a stronger position that when the dam is the capacity is increased, that we would then be able to participate in the receiving a share of that additional water. So we're just saying to the council, we've already been committing hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars today in the feasibility study, and at some point in the future, right, there will be a plan to come up with a plan to build up the dam and create more capacity to hold water behind the dam. And then, in the way we translate that, that's just additional water to the city. So that's we're just letting council know because we're bringing to you discussions about paying for the feasibility studies and continuing that discussion. And that will be that'll be coming to the council over the next decade or so, those kind of conversations.
I'll just tag in on the SRP on the Bartlett Dam. By having access to that water, then that water can be used all throughout the city.
Right.
whereas SRP water, it has grandfathered rights, so it has to stay in a certain geographical area, and then this water can be used elsewhere in the city. So it just gives us an additional water portfolio in our community. So it's something that we've obligated, and every city pays a certain share, and you'll get a certain amount of acre feet out of that when it's all done.
Well, and Mayor, just like many, many years ago, Mesa participated in the construction of the Roosevelt Dam, right? And as a result, receive a significant portion of that water rights that serves Mesa. So it's kind of like you make that investment to assure that water supply to your community in the future.
Yeah, and we're looking at 10 years down the road at a minimum to get any of that water. Vice Mayor. Oh, wait, he has one more question to answer.
Yeah,
Brian
Mayor,
does.
Councilmember Adams, the third question you had was asking about set aside. So in the utility fund, we do have a set aside fund for repairs, what we call RER. It's repairs, replacement, and extension of the system. So we have some set aside there that the utility departments can use. However, on significant ones, what we do is, it's one of the reasons why we like to have a higher percentage of our reserve for fund balance is because of those emergencies that we can then dip into one time for those in that fund balance to be able to make those emergency fixes at a time. So on the general governmental side, we do have a fund that we do set aside. For instance, the past couple of years, we have set aside monies, funds because of inflationary costs. So we would set aside, and then when a project was designed, we would, when it first estimated, and then after it was designed, we saw significant increases in the estimates due to just inflation. So we had that set aside to be able to continue with those projects. So we do have some set asides for those
So
emergencies.
Brian, for example, we had projects that were funded by bonds. We went and received authorization from the community for a street project, let's say, or a library. That's a better example, a library project. So back in the time when we set that budget and we went to the voters for approval, by the time we get ready to do the project, that could be, 4 or 5 years later. And of course, in the last 3 to 4 years, we've experienced tremendous inflation growth. Well, during that time, the city was also benefiting from a very robust economy, especially in the construction side. We were receiving a lot of one-time revenues. So what we've done is we've taken all the bond funds that were dedicated to that project initially, but then we've had to cover the overruns with cash from the general fund. And so, sometimes I hear there's criticisms about the city spending more money than it's bringing in. Well, if you go and look at, we never do that, right? Just remember that. The city never spends more money than it has. Never has, never could. Unconstitutional, impossible to do. So what happens though, is we have a large reserves. So sometimes those projects get carried over into another year. So what may look like is in the current year, the sources and the expenses may be out of whack, or we're spending more than bringing in. Well, part of that is because we're carrying over large capital projects that are needing of one-time dollars that have been collected in the prior year. They're in the reserve, they're in the fund balance. So yes, when you look at the current year sources and uses, there's a deficit, but the money for those projects is found, it falls to the bottom, and it's found in the reserves. So we're always able to cover our cost. And I think we show you the 5-year forecast, we always have enough money every year to pay the bills. What we're concerned about is how that fund balance is starting to kind of get smaller and smaller. And so we need to be careful to make sure we adjust our ongoing revenues with our ongoing expenses. That's a long answer, but
No,
I think it helps
good
understand the
information.
dynamics of how we look. If you just look at 1 year and say, oh my goodness, the city is spending so much more money than it's bringing in that year, well, that could happen because we're carrying over a lot of these big capital projects that have multi-year, it takes time for them to come on board. The money is there, it's in the reserves. And so we'll put, those projects sometimes are happening like this coming year, they're getting paid out from that reserve. So we never spend more money. Don't let anybody tell you that we spend more money than we have. Our available resources are always, and throughout even the whole 5-year forecast, what we concern ourselves about is the reserve dropping to a smaller level than we're comfortable with. but we always have enough money, always have available resources to cover our costs. We're not bankrupt, we're not going to go bankrupt, we're in a solid position.
I think one thing you could use as an example is East Mark Library, when we.
That's
That's our latest
Mayor.
example,
Thank you.
I believe.
Yep. What's that?
Well, we bonded that project,
Yeah,
the
it was
library,
authorized, it was
and
voted
then-
on by the community.
And then we added some additional funding for it to complete.
We had to because the costs overruns.
Overruns.
So we took it from cash. And a lot of those projects, here's what's interesting, a lot of those big projects, those big construction projects that created construction sales tax that was not built in any forecast, were probably out in that same area, right? Big projects, big manufacturing, data centers. That construction sales tax we collected, that's the perfect example of how we could take one-time revenues, construction sales tax revenues, and cover the shortfall on some of these capital projects.
Mr. Adams?
I appreciate the very comprehensive answer. I think what I was more interested in, though, if you know, so how do we figure that emergency set aside? Experientially, a percentage, and I'm just curious how we establish it.
So
I think it's
yes,
a good idea, but I'm just curious how we establish it.
Mayor, Councilmember Adams, yes, it is a percentage for the utilities for the set aside. We use some of that for, it's a percentage, it's 2% of their revenues get.
Let's talk about the reserves. Let's talk about the big picture. So you have the first slide you start your budget process off of is financial principles. What does it
Yes.
talk about for the reserve, the fund balance?
So the fund balance, we like to keep it or above 20% for the fund balance for the utilities. And that is where we set aside those dollars, is knowing that, okay, the 20% we have available. As Mr. Brady indicated, we see in the outer years it is dropping below that, but however, we still want to be able to look at this year and the following years to be able to say, okay, how much reserves do we have? And that's the percentage that we look at to be able to say, okay, if we have an emergency, do we have enough funding in the reserves to be able to do that? And then if that, once that goes out, how do we replenish those reserves?
So they're under a kind of public finance perspective about reserves, fund balances for whether it's general fund or even utility fund, kind of best, kind of the standard practice you start with is you want to have 1 month of reserves, right? So if you can cover your cost of 1 month if something happens. So if you do that calculation, that's somewhere between 10 and 12%, right? That's a minimum you try to get to. Because it's a utility and the dynamics of the utility, we kind of push that a little bit higher just because there's just a lot of things that can go wrong in the moving parts in the utility. So we've always said we'd feel comfortable. You're going to see in our forecast out years, we're not there. And that's why we keep talking about now's the time to be making incremental changes and adjusting things to try to get to that percentage. We don't accomplish that at the end of the 5-year forecast, but our goal is to always try to get there. But certainly we get there for next year. The budget you will approve will accomplish that. But it is starting to decline. We're starting to see that come down. And so we have to, we either have to pull back expenses or we have to find new revenue sources or enhance revenue sources to get there. But the concept of the reserve has always been, when we have these discussions with, the rating agencies across the country, is they're always looking at that as kind of an indicator. Can you have set aside to cover an emergency? And the rule of thumb has always been, do you have enough for at least 30 days? That's kind of been a month of reserves that's sitting. Now, if you can do more, that's better. We've carried 30% reserves in our utilities in the past, and same thing in the general fund. And then you start getting the criticism like, why are you hoarding all this money? Why aren't you, you should be using it to spend. And so we're trying to find that, balance between the 10% and the 25%. It's somewhere in between there.
You're good? Vice Mayor?
Yeah, just some comments. Well, first of all, thanks for the library. It's awesome. It's very good. It's coming along. It's coming along. The comment on Bartlett Dam and Reservoir expansion, this is an extremely important project for Mesa and the Valley and everybody who's going to participate. These numbers are going to be off, but it's rough. Roughly about a third of Mesa's water comes from SRP, right, in these lakes. The rest of us are reliant on the CAP, am I off terribly? A little off? 50/50? Okay, 50/50.
60/40.
They're 60/40? Yeah, that's probably, yeah.
Sorry, Mark.
So the CAP water is getting less and less. It's expensive to access the wells, but when you look at where the growth is in this presentation, a lot of this growth is happening off project. So as the CAP water gets cut, as it's becoming increasingly difficult to get to the water in the ground, projects like this that will allow us to transfer that water into the off-project districts. And the off-project district is, a lot of it is basically my district and other people's districts as well, don't get me wrong. But
You're an expensive district.
I'm an expensive district, but I'm also the district that has the economic development growth. It has the airport, it has the business growth district. Yeah. Right? So it's important that we have this critical resource. And actually, it's going to lead to a question here. So being part of this is important. There are other cities to our west where they get large portions of their water secured by SRP, and it is a less expensive source. So that is reflected. So to continue to have the economic growth that we hope to have, we have to have the water. So it's a project that is extremely important. But it does relate to this question. You in your presentation, you talked about gas lines in the Magna area and some investments out there. You also talk about water resources, large pipelines that are coming into Southeast Mesa for large water users. Clearly, those aren't going to be houses. Those are going to be, the advanced manufacturing and other development activities. So how are we structuring the payment of these capital projects? How are we structuring our water rates and repayments so that it is the cost of the infrastructure needs are borne by those who are using them most? Because I think that's a concern that some homes have.
So, Vice Mayor, if we could, are you presenting today, Chris? Yes. I think he's going to address that. We have a whole presentation on how to
In the water resources?
capture
Okay.
New development impacts on the utilities.
Excellent.
So if you could,
just make
Chris,
that
is
a
that
point.
correct? Are you covering that today?
That was going to be at a future audit and finance.
Oh, that's right. Could you mention that today?
Yes.
I know I saw the presentation. I'm getting confused about which time. But Chris will present that. We can talk about that during his presentation.
Okay, I think it'd be great just to get the executive summary of how
Yeah, we
that
can do
works
that.
out so that people understand that we are paying attention to that. So then the only other question I have is that I have the 26 to 30 capital projects list, I think you sent me. Those are the ones that are funded. Is there access to a list of projects that we're not going to be funding?
We can get that list.
Okay, that'd be great. Thank you, Mayor.
Anything else, council?
No, just District 6 is great.
So
Well,
thank you.
just to summarize, I think if you look over all the utility CIP projects that we have, on the water and the energy portion, it's a lot of capital outlay that we have, but we're looking at future growth and development in those areas, and the returns will be over time. But I appreciate looking forward, because I know one example in my council district back then, we had a section, break water mains broke all the way down a street. You'd fix one and then they'd turn it on, it'd break another one and another one. Chris knows all about that, but that was some of the money set aside to repair that water main. That was unexpected, even though it was about 50 years old. But those are kind of the things that we're geared up to do. But then looking at all the future replacement and projects we have, this is a lot of work. So kudos to not only the finance team, but the boots on the ground, putting the pipes in the ground.
Mayor, you just made a great point. Let me just state it one more time, because I think it's important, because Mr. Summers does a great job advocating for Southeast Mesa, and which is very well duly noted, is fine. But that doesn't mean the city isn't committed and isn't spending millions of dollars, as you just said, on the replacement of pipes in the quarter sections throughout the city. We prioritize that because we know that Chris does a great job at doing an inventory of the pipe. We know the age of the pipe. We know the areas that we need to get into and start replacing the pipe. So that's actively part of the CIP. I think you go in the CIP, you'll see those projects in there. So thank you for reminding that we are committed to also rehabbing the west side infrastructure at the same time.
Yeah, that's slide 5, and one of
Right.
the challenges we have is maintaining current infrastructure,
Yeah.
and I would argue updating current infrastructure. I know one important project we did in downtown Mesa was updating the water lines through downtown
Yeah.
many years ago because it couldn't supply the water for fire protection.
Yep,
You can't
correct.
have a bar with an occupancy, right, or a restaurant with an occupancy if you can't provide that water. So that was an important project for downtown.
And Mayor and Council, it also comes into play when we talk about street projects, right? Because a lot of these street projects, you heard from Eric, are that we have the funds to do it, but we also have to make sure that the utilities are being addressed before we go in and make these major improvements in these large arterial roads. Because you don't want us building out a new arterial or rehabbing a new arterial and then coming back in 3 years, 4 years with a utility. So we're trying to get all those coordinated, but makes it a big utility project as well as a major road project at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mayor, can I just ask, Vice Mayor asked for a list of non-funded projects. Is that not, on slide 10, is this just a short list of the full list, or?
Yes, Mayor, Councilmember Goforth. This is just a shorter list of kind of some of the significant ones that
Okay.
that are unfunded that we would be looking for to be funded.
But we can give you
We can
the
get you a
the list that we have in front of us today. I mean, what we think about.
Why don't you send it to all council?
Yeah, we will.
We'll do it.
Is that your request, Alicia? Yeah, okay, great. Well, let's move over to non-utility capital improvement program.
So non-utility, as mentioned, this is more of the general governmental side, as you see, the library, the Gateway Library there pictured. So the next slide, what I'd like to do is give council an update on where the city is with prior bond authorizations. So what this slide does is in categories for the general obligation bonds, just a reminder, the general obligation bonds are paid for by the secondary property tax. So with parks and culture, the 2018, all of that has been, the 91.2 million has been allocated and finishing up projects. As you see, the 24, we're just getting started. We have allocated some on the parks and culture side of the things for the bonds. Library, as you see, the 2018 bond, that's the Gateway Library. That is 100% funded. And then on the public safety, we have 3 authorizations, 2018, 2022, and then the new one for 24. So 2018 has all been obligated. 2022, we have about 77% of that allocated to projects. And then 24, we're just getting started on some of those projects that we have. And then streets is the 2013, that is 100% allocated. And then you have the 2020 Mesa Moves. We have 89.3 million out of the 100 million obligated of the bonds. Just to remind you, I have some more detailed slides coming up. But just to remind council is that the bonds that we were issuing was 100 million, but then we were also using reimbursements from MAG for roughly $60 million to do other projects. So that's why it says 100 million there.
So when you say it's allocated, what does that trigger? What is that? That doesn't mean the project started necessarily. What is that?
Correct, Mayor, Councilmember Goforth. Thank you for the question. That is correct. So what we've done is we've identified funding sources for projects and prioritized those projects, working with city management and council and the departments of saying, okay, these projects we really need to do, so here's the allocation. And so with specifically streets, you'll see coming up to where we thought 100 to the $160 million would be enough funding at that time for a list of projects. Well, now since the construction cost has significantly increased, you'll see some of those projects that were listed, we're not able to fund them because of construction costs on current projects. It were inflated, so we had to use some of those resources now. The ones that are unfunded, we'll have to try to find resources for. So I'll get into a little bit more deeper on that, but that's kind of how what we look at is, okay, what's our funding source? And then are we able to do all the projects we can, or are the costs increasing to where now we have to reprioritize projects?
So can we get a list? I think you did this last year of completed. And I know we talk later on the slides about some that are completed, but of those allocated,
So,
much are
yeah, so
completed? Does that make
coming up in
sense?
these
Slide
slides.
15, I think we do that for streets. We
right?
do that on streets beginning on slide 15.
And the percentage of the allocation you designate as completed? That's
No,
what
so
I'm asking.
allocated is, so allocated can be completed projects, but it can also be projects that are under design or projects that we are looking to go into design that we say, okay, we have enough funding for this project
Yeah.
because the estimate came in at this amount, so we have enough funding for it. So
That's what I mean.
we're
I'd like to
allocating.
understand of the ones allocated, that how many are completed? What percentage is complete? So in Parks and Culture in 2018, we've allocated 100%. What percent of those projects are complete?
Those are 100% complete. So
Okay.
we can get you a list.
Thank you.
So on the next slide is just a reminder of the 2024 bonds that we're doing. What we've already actually started, once the bond authorization was approved by voters, we went starting to work on the fiber network down in the public safety. Also, we are in the middle of doing phase 2 of the IDEA Museum renovation, and then also the Serine House. So those 3 projects, plus we started design on park renovation. So those 4 projects there, we've already hit the ground running on moving those forward for the 24 bond authorization.
Question? Ms.
So
Pillsbury.
on the 2022 public safety, that only 77% is allocated. We still have some projects that we were planning on doing from the 2022 bond that just haven't been allocated, but that we're still planning on allocating money towards?
That is correct. I believe one of them is the public safety training facility. So that is where we're looking at of being able to allocate the rest of it to there. But then also we may have to find some additional funding to complete the project. So
Would we use 2024 public safety bonds to finish that?
that we would.
Probably not.
Yeah.
Only because those already have their purpose, they already have their identified project. Unless we saw there was going to be a significant underrun on those. So what it means is that the training facility, again, like a lot of things, it was a very large project inside of that bond program. And it included both police and fire. So they're going through the master planning right now, laying it out. And we'll have to decide whether or not there's enough funding in that project, how much of it could be phased in. The challenge with the training facility, it takes, it's a lot of moving pieces where I think we have to take projects out or take facilities out to expand other projects. And so it creates this kind of domino effect, and it's kind of hard to do it in phases because you end up taking out a building and in order to build a larger building, but we can come back and brief you on that. But the idea is we may be short on that. We know we're short based on the original scope of the training facilities out there. So think about when you were at that campus, right, for that falling off, it's that whole campus looking at doing a lot of work on that entire campus. So
Do we have did we originally have an amount we were planning on using for that? I mean, we have 23 left, no, I guess 23% left, which is not 23 million.
Councilman, I'll have to go back and reconcile the numbers, but I know that the scope, and then once we got into it and the discussion between police and fire about what works, I think has grown a little bit. I mean, not only inflation, but I think there's some other needs they've identified that are going to make that a challenge when we come back with the master plan. We need to finish the master plan. We need to come back with the details. And we're spending some of this bond funding to do that. And then they'll come back to the council and have a discussion about, well, with what's left, we can do this much, but we really need this much more. And that could be a future bond authorization in the future.
But that 23% that's left is really just the training
I don't know
facility,
if it's all of it, or are you certain? I don't know what percentage. I know that that's a big project that's still not allocated. I do know that, but I don't know if that represents all of it.
And nothing for that was on the 2024 bonds is what you're saying?
No, it was not.
Yeah, okay.
So correct, Mayor, Councilmember Spilsbury, if we go to the next slide. So on the 2024 bond, the amounts on here add up to the roughly 260 million. So on the 2024 bond, this is the projects that were listed specifically for that bond.
Mayor, I have a question.
Yes.
So this is where I get kind of hazy and a little bit confused. So at the time, the public safety training was a priority. So we went out to the voters and we said, this is a priority and this is how much it's going to cost. And they authorized, they approved us to authorize the bonds. So how then do we get to another bond and another bond and go out and ask for money for new projects without finishing the original project? Is it just come down on the priority list? Like we
Yeah,
after
well,
so many years, now this is a priority, so we go out for that, and this one just kind of
It
gets
will allow
lower?
council, we did the same thing on the police headquarters building. It happened. We allocated back in, I can't remember what the first authorization was for the headquarters building. But after we got into it with the consultants and we had the funding, we realized there wasn't enough money to finish out the building, right? And so we came back, whatever the next time we had an opportunity for public safety and asked for additional funding. So it does, especially, and more happens on these larger scale, kind of not, if it's building a fire station on a piece of land, it's a lot easier for us to understand and control the cost. When it's these major campus renovations that have multiple, like police and fire and all kinds of different uses, when we get into it and they recognize the challenges of existing facilities, but having to take those out and what do you do in between those, and they're going to come back. They know they need to come back. It's been put on hold because there are just so many challenges and moving pieces out there, and the way we do training is changing with technology and a lot of opportunities to look at kind of the facilities that we need out there. So we can come back and answer that question, but every once in a while we do have, and it's not very often, right? It's a police headquarters renovation. It's a training facility. We should say campus. We use the word facility, but it's really the campus as you've seen it, and trying to master plan that. Otherwise, we don't see that. It doesn't quite happen that way other than if it's an overrun, right? Because of inflation like the library did, where we had to find additional dollars to support the library.
Okay.
Yeah, Mayor, Councilmember Goforth, yeah, the police evidence building, we went to bond in 2018 as we were designing it, and then COVID happened and construction prices spiked. Then we went back out in 2022 to finish authorization and be able to fund the evidence building, the rest of it.
But these are the exceptions. I mean,
Yep.
the majority of our projects, we get them through. Sometimes recent, we've had to add cash from the general governmental to cover the differences.
Okay,
You all good?
thank you.
Mr. Adams?
Thank you. I want to make sure I'm clear on something here. So let's look at slide 14. So we go out to the voters and we tell the voters, these are the items that we'd like your approval for. And I assume we tell them that in this particular case, that these are the things we propose to issue bonds in whatever total for. So how much leeway, latitude, moving the dominoes around and reshuffling this do we have? Because here's my question. We tell the voters, this is what we want to do with that whatever $1 million. And then I'm hearing that we might not do that we might move these priorities around or not do this or move something else in. Am I understanding that right? Or what are the parameters of how this works? Because then the voter comes back and says, well, you told me you were going to do this, that, and the other, but you didn't do it. So how's the accountability
I don't
there?
think, well, the accountability is we deliver on the projects that are allocated. Remember, these dollar amounts that are set for authorization that you vote on to take to the voters, the staff's working on them for a year or 2 years, comes to the council goes through a process to say, we're comfortable with this authorization and the fiscal impact it might have in the future. So there's already that 2 years. The council then goes through their deliberations. They may approve this in May or June. It doesn't go up to the ballot till November. If it's so you've got that time. So you're thinking now you're probably 2 or 3 years out since you came up with this estimate. Then in November, it gets approved. You can't start spending the money theoretically until the next year. And even then, the council at some point has to authorize the sale of the bond. So it could be 3 to 4 years. These numbers are now sitting there, and we're getting ready to do the design. And inevitably, we try to build in inflation, but we've never been able to estimate this kind of inflation recently. So again, we do prioritize. We establish the priority of the projects and when they're going to come on. A lot of it has to do if there's been, how far along they are. Some of them might have already had some design work ahead of time. Others may need land acquisition. Others are ready to go at the time. And so we'll sit those and look at those. We look at, as Brian said, are they going to have any fiscal impact as far as additional operations and maintenance? And so those may not happen in the first 2 years. They may be pushed out so we can have that capacity to be able to fund them. And so all those are the dynamics. There are very few times that I can think of where we've not done a project. What might happen is it just gets deferred because we don't have the funding to do it. And it may take another 2 or 3 years or going through another bond election to come up with the cost or to cover the cost for an evidence facility. And then we have the additional fund and then we build it. So we've delivered on it. I mean, there may be some projects, I'm sure there are, that someone could point to me and say, well, you never did this. I'm not aware of very often. I think we try very diligently to try to get all these projects accomplished. The only one I can think of right now is Buckhorn Bass. Buckhorn Bass was put, sorry, Jill, I didn't want to bring it up. Buckhorn Bass was put on a ballot 2012? What was it? It was a long time ago. We didn't own the land. We didn't have an agreement with the property owners, but the council wanted that to be a priority. And it was, it was a historic area. We never could make it. I didn't even drag Jim out there to go look at the place. We could never get a reasonable agreement on the purchase of the property. And so that project never happened. Now, what we did is we took those funds and put them, because they were approved under our parks category, we took those funds and allocated them to within that same category, right? So if there's a parks project that doesn't get done, we don't go move it to public safety. We keep it within parks. And we have a very big discussion about what we can do. I think, I may be wrong, I think we took some of those funds and put them into the post and renovating the post. So if it happens, it's rare, but sometimes those things happen. But
I'm not questioning the mechanics of it, and I understand that it's a very accounting-heavy, resource allocation-heavy process. I'm not questioning that. I guess to boil my question down to a very simple form, because I'm a simple guy, is if we go out and tell the voters a specific laundry list of things, they typically might expect that those things will happen because they don't know all this behind the scenes stuff.
And I think the majority of the time they do. But here's the challenge. We'll go back to the Gateway Library.
Yeah.
The city got to a point where it was $6 to $7 million short from the bond funds, and it could have said, sorry, we just can't do it, right? But the city said, no, we're going to try to scrape up dollars. There's a lot of dollars to find a way to do it. So we try very hard. I'd be interested if there's someone who thinks we haven't done a lot of projects. There's just not a long list of projects we haven't done.
And I'm not suggesting that we don't do that. All I'm asking is if we tell the voters this, and we have the ability, as we should, to move things around and reallocate and reposition, retime, do we make that clear so that people understand that we might have to do that?
But we do it within that category. In public safety, it happens within public safety.
Okay.
If it's parks, it happens within parks.
Okay.
It doesn't go from parks to public safety, or we go build something that was never on the list. We try to complete the projects that were identified in those categories.
So if somebody were to read the fine print in the voter brochure, they would read that.
Oh, wait, no,
So-
this is Jim.
So Mayor and Council, and I think this conversation, and I remember the question came from Councilmember Goforth, and I think it was about a year ago, this idea that That there is, I'll just say it, there's no guarantee that these are the projects. These are examples of the projects. And yeah, and that is stated. And I'll say that is what almost every city does. The bond council a couple years ago gave me an example where one city did project-specific bonding, and they got caught with that. And so they ended up not doing a project, and so then they were stuck with permanently unallocatable funding for the bonds. Almost every city does it by categories, not projects. But in order to get to a number to explain what you intend to do, you show the projects that you intend to do. And then you have to come back, we always come back before council if we're gonna change the projects. And so it is a very public process to change the projects. And I remember Buckholm Mouth, I remember that meeting. And I remember it because they actually thought we had to buy the property. And so they used that as leverage as to try to get a higher price. And we said, we don't have to. This was just an example. This was a project that we intended to do, but you can't force us to buy the property.
Okay.
And so that was just, so these are, so we bond to categories with intended projects. We don't bond for specific projects.
Okay, and Mr. Smith, people say that lawyers complicate things. You give me the straight answer. Thank you very much. I understand. Good thing you don't bill by the word.
Ms. Spilsbury has a question.
I just wanted to add to that. I actually really appreciate the way that we did this last bond cycle. We had public meetings and people came and they got to put their input on certain projects and certain ideas. But I feel like it was very well represented that these were just ideas. They weren't concrete. The rec center, for example, like we showed a location of it, but that wasn't like a guaranteed where it was going to be or whatever. Recently, you know, there's cities and towns that have done like a $500 million bond and don't say where they're going to use the money, and it didn't pass because there wasn't specifics about where they were planning on using the money, and the citizens didn't appreciate that, right? Like they don't want to just write a check to the city, and so I really, really appreciate that we have specific ideas and examples so that we can prove that why we need that money for these certain areas, right? Like the Idea Museum was a perfect example of something that we were pretty guaranteed we were going to use the money for that, right? And so they could come and see what types of things were being projected for that. But I think it, at least to me, through all of that, because there was extensive public outreach and community outreach on that, it was made very clear that these were just ideas of things that we would like to do. So I really appreciate that.
Ms. Duff.
Just to back up a little bit on the allocations and the percentages, those are allocations financially that have been fulfilled. It's not necessarily number of projects been filled. So we see 100%. We say we've used 100% of the funds allocated, but we haven't done 100% of the projects, right?
Mayor, Councilmember Duff, yes, that is correct. So the allocated is the dollar amount of what was authorized. So for instance, the very first one, Parks and Culture for 2018, voters authorized $91.2 million for Parks and Culture in that authorization. We've allocated $90.8 million, so almost the full million has been allocated to projects.
Financially.
Financially,
Dollars.
yes.
Okay. What's the intention on the Safe Streets for All? How is that? Do we know how that's going to be spent on the GO bond?
No, the council asked us to come back to you with that conversation.
Okay. All right. I'll make my usual plea for trying to bridge what's authorized on the bonds and the community will. When I first came on council, we introduced the Mesa Moves program. We did tremendous community outreach, digitally, in person, promotions, blah, 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 blah. It went on and on. It was very, very extensive. And we created a priority list based on our needs and the community will. Then we bond for it, and then we don't have the money for all the projects. But we do a feasibility study on, I can get specifically in active transportation on the Center Street Connector. We didn't have money to do the project, so we did a feasibility study. There was the Eastern Canal Shared Use Path. The Center Street Connector was number 6 on our priority, number 7 in the Eastern Canal Shared Use Path. So we went into design on that. So the 2024 bond comes around, and we go out to the public and say, hey, what's important to you? And present ideas again, and said, hey, we heard you in the 2020, the Center Street Connector, here's what it would look like. And what do you think about that? And again, the public said, absolutely, we want it, we need to do it. And we don't even have it listed on any status. It just disappeared. So I don't know how we bridge that, but we have to have community will and our allocations somehow working together. So that's my only thing, because I don't know. We just have disposed of it after,
Did you say we bonded for it before?
yes, in 2020.
So we bonded for it in 2020.
It was on the list of the priority list.
And now
but
we've
as
bonded for it a
Mr.
second
Smith
time?
had, is authorized, yeah, we did.
Oh.
We had a priority list, it's 100 million, we're
Yeah.
gonna get 60 million reimbursement. It was number 6 on the priority list for all transportation projects. That means intersections, roads,
Yeah.
everything, number 6 on the priority list. But we bond as a bucket for active transportation and streets. We ran out of money on the active transportation. I think we allocated to our number 7 priority, Eastern Canal, I don't know. So we got the feasibility study. Okay, like Mr. Brady said, yeah, we have to sometimes go to a second bond to get things done because we run out of money, especially then, 2020, and we know what happened then as far as inflation. So we go out and we present it again to the public. We have beautiful poster boards and stuff, and the public says, yeah, that is a great project. But the intention was under the Safe Streets for All, but it doesn't sound like that's going to be allocated for that for a number of reasons. So, but at least what I'm upset about is we've dropped it completely off of our list. We dropped it on our 2050 transportation plan, and we've dropped it off this presentation. Somewhere we should have representation for that level of priority.
So Mayor, Councilor Duff, I don't, those funds have not disappeared. I don't know, they're still there, right? They're still intact for that. What's the project? What do we call it?
Center Street
It's had a lot of different names, or I think we're just calling it Center Street.
Center Street, okay. So Eric can just give an update real quick. So what last time we brought it to council months ago, there was a lot of discussion on council about the project, about the elements were included. And I think the staff's taken that back. We also had to deal with some issues about in downtown and Center Street. So I think we're close, if near ready to bring that project back. But the project, as far as the dollars associated with that project, have not moved to some other project. But so Eric, you want to just quickly give an update on where we are?
Sure, I think, so as part of the 2020 Mesa Moves, and this is where it gets a little difficult, there was $100 million in bonds, and then there was other funding. All the bond money we used for our arterial roadway projects so that we could get the reimbursements through the Proposition 400 to then fund arterial reconstruction projects and active transportation projects. We had a pot of $20 million for active transportation projects, which is where the Center Street project fell. We had a list of, I think, 7 projects that we brought back to council. We had enough money for, at that time, and I'll couch that as at that time for 4 projects to go to construction. And then we chose to use some of that funding also then to do the feasibility study for Center Street. So I think since that time, we've completed the feasibility study, and then we've been looking for a way to, we haven't had funding to construct the project. And I think that's something, it's still in our 5-year CIP, but it's shown as unfunded.
So I think in the current status of things, it will have to slip to yet another bond. It'll have to go,
But it was
whenever we
never-
decide to do another transportation
The
bond.
construction side of that project was never in that. It was just the
The feasibility
feasibility study.
Well, 6.8 million was allocated on our priority list from the 2020 bond. 7 million was allocated in Safe Streets for All because we thought that it would fall under that, and I have been since informed that it won't qualify for that. So I think we're on to yet another bond in the future.
Councilmember Duff, Mayor, the $6.8 million number was during a presentation to discuss the bond. When we brought back the active transportation projects after the bond was, or after the Mesa Moves program was approved, at the direction of council, we were just directed to do the feasibility study and we didn't have money for the entire project. So we've never had funding for construction for Center Street.
How much did the feasibility study cost? 20,000?
No, I want to say it's around the 300,000.
300,000?
I don't have an exact number, but ballpark, it was in the hundreds of thousands.
Okay, so we allocated on the prior, 20 million for active transportation. We spent 300,000 for the feasibility study, and then
The Safe Streets for All grant, we did not get, that's correct, right?
No,
It was
no,
a-
this is 2020, there was no Safe Streets for All.
So the priority, what we heard from council as we brought the active transportation projects back was to do shared use paths. And so we looked at projects and 2 Eastern Canal projects, one from Brown to Broadway and then another one from Broadway to Baseline. Those hopefully are going under construction this year to add shared use paths. We had 2 other projects to go under construction. One is along the US 60 to connect the Consolidated Canal and the Eastern Canal. We actually don't have, and we'll get into these in these slides here, but we haven't started that project because we don't have funding. And then also to finish off the Gateway shared use path along the 202, that was authorized in 2020, but we don't have funding for that either, just with construction cost escalating.
And so the reason that the Center Street connector didn't make the list is,
The council didn't, we just allocated funds for the feasibility study. That was it.
Correct.
But now what you're saying is, if I'm following all of this, that other projects are getting priority that were approved after the Center Street project. Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm saying that
Okay.
the projects that I just discussed, those were all part of the 2020 discussion. And those 4 projects were the ones that council gave us direction to move forward with design and construction.
I think
And
what
then
he's-
we had 2 projects that were just feasibility studies. One was Center Street, one was phase 2 of the Lehigh Loop.
And more projects are actually falling off the list.
Correct.
It can't be done because the funding's not, the priority projects that were ahead are costing us more than we anticipated, so we're funding those, which means the ones that were out in the future are falling off as far as being able to be funded. So we're not adding things that weren't there before. It's actually the opposite of what's happened.
Did we have was there a 2018 funding for any bond for active transportation?
Part of the 2018 Parks Bond, we had a small portion for shared use paths in the 2018 Parks Bond.
Have those been completed?
The Lehigh Phase 1 path has been completed, or the construction was just completed. And then we have signals for crossings along the Eastern Canal that should be going under construction this summer.
And then the 2018 will be
Yes.
done.
Correct.
Mr. you done, Ms. Duff?
no, I'm just saying on the priority list for the Mesa Moves bond, that was created by council before we went to bond. We said, these are our priorities, this is the bond package, and we go. So we have a council, so you're saying at some point after when the money's being allocated, council said, no, we don't need to do that. We'll do these other shared use paths that weren't on the priority list. And I need the minutes from that because I think I would have certainly remembered that. I don't know. Anyway, what I'm saying is over myself on this. And we'll just leave it at that so we can move on with our budget.
I
Mr.
won't-
Adams?
Mayor, I won't belabor this, but Councilmember Duff's line of questioning is germane to the issue I brought up earlier, and I'd like to see more information about it. Thank you.
All right.
I would too, for that matter. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric. Brian, where were we at?
So, Mayor, Council, next slide, while Eric steps away. The next couple of slides is kind of going back to the 2020 Mesa Moves bond status. So as mentioned, as Eric mentioned, and we had $100 million in bonds, but then we were also using the reimbursement from to fund about 60 million of other projects. So here's for the street enhancements, just to highlight some of them. The projects status, some of the statuses have changed in the past couple of days that I've been aware of, is for instance, the Val Vista Pueblo Avenue to 60. Those bids are in and will be coming to council on May 5th. Another one is the Ray Road connection at Ellsworth. Those bids are going to be due here in another week. And then construction should hopefully start in fall of 26. The Ellsworth widening, the waiting for GMP, actually the GMP is in review and construction would start in this coming up fiscal year, so summer of 25 and go through summer of 26. And then also what we have here asterisked is you'll see Elliott Road, Sossman to Ellsworth. It's in design. And so this is where we were mentioning about costs escalating. This project, the costs of this project has escalated significantly. So what we have done to be able to move this project forward is allocate some other funding sources. So the other funding source would be the local street sales tax that we're going to use to be able to fund this project to move it forward. As you see, some of the other projects that are completed, Signal Butte Roads, Williamsfield to Pecos and Pecos to Germain. And then some of the other arterial, this is using that pot of 60 million of reimbursement that we're hoping to get all of 60 million. Southern Arterial Reconstruct is under construction, Greenfield Arterial is under construction, and then the Eastern Canal Shared Use Path is, the design is completed.
On the Ellsworth Road widening, GMP, I know that there are some future projects coming that are going to require water and wastewater infrastructure improvements. Are we coordinating those? Yep. Okay. I just want to make sure that we're doing it all at the same time, so I get yelled at for all at the same time. Thank you.
So, Mayor, Council, that is a good point, Vice Mayor, is that just to remind Council and the viewers is that the departments, water, energy, and transportation, all those departments, they collaborate very frequently on these projects to make sure, okay, if we're going to do a street project, do any of the utilities need to be upgraded? Or if we're going to do a utility project, can we do the streets at the same time? So they do a significant collaboration when doing these projects. Even though this is I'm talking about a street project, behind the scenes, there are talking about the utility projects too.
Yeah, and I appreciate I think we all appreciate it when we coordinate these things together. It saves time, saves a little bit of money, and we like to see, we understand the construction, we just like to see it actively worked on. And I think our CIP projects are pretty good at that. Our private development's a whole different conversation. So thank you.
Is there
Ms.
any?
Spilsbury.
Yeah, is there any order to this list?
Mayor, Councilmember Spilsbury, no, this is just a list of the project. It is not in priority order.
Okay.
Thank you.
So the next slide is of status is funded under design, but the construction is unfunded. So these projects we're looking at design, and then hopefully we can find down the road some funding to complete the projects. So University Drive at Stapley, Southern Avenue at Country Club, and then the 60 is the 60 shared use path eastern to Consolidated, which Eric just kind of mentioned. That's in design. Mesa Gateway, phase 3, that's also design only. And then here's, as we were mentioning, because of escalating costs, projects that we've had to put as unfunded until we can find another funding source is a couple of, 3 of them are arterial reconstructs at Broadway Road, and then also Williams Field from SR 24 in Ellsworth.
That's done.
So moving on, Mayor and Council, some of the projects that the city completed in fiscal year 24-25, the Lehigh Shared Use Path Phase 1, the IDEA Museum renovation Phase 1, a couple of parks and recreation projects of the Red Mountain Park expansion, the Neon Gardens, public safety, the Northeast Public Safety Facility will be opening up here soon. Falcon Field has a couple of projects that they completed, and then the new wellness center, the new city hall, and then also the Hibbert Garage will be here completed before the end of the fiscal year. So the current CIP projects that we've got going on is phase 2 of the IDEA Museum is currently underway. The Countryside Park expansion, the library, Gateway Library, that is under construction, as we know, hopefully by the end of the year. I believe October, November will be opened. PD headquarters is underway. Falcon Field has a taxiway, and then, as you'll see, transportation has several projects currently underway. So now, the projects that we're looking to begin construction in 25-26, the arts and culture, the MAC Arroyo will go under construction. The Signal Butte Park Phase 2, Shrine House, and then you'll see the fire stations, 223, 224, and 205 will hopefully go under construction in 25-26. A library book locker at Gene Autry Park. As you'll see, transportation has several more projects that are hoping to go under construction starting in 25-26. And then also we have the Cubs facility remodel that we'll be doing.
Just to be clear, the Ray Road connection to Ellsworth, is that the realignment of Ray Road?
So
At
Mayor,
Ellsworth?
Vice Mayor, I believe so. If Eric,
Okay.
I believe that is the realignment of Ray Road at Ellsworth.
Why'd you leave? I thought I was done, yes.
Yes. And that's going out to Hawes, from Ellsworth to Hawes, and then Hawes getting a signal?
The traffic signal at Hawes is actually a separate project that will be completed beforehand. And then we have striping work that goes all the way back to Hawes. Essentially, this CIP project starts at the 202 underpass, goes underneath the 202, and then realigns Ray Road at Ellsworth.
Okay, and we hope to see this contract come to council before summer break?
Yeah, I heard Beth say yes. So, yes, we would love to see it as soon as possible.
Excellent. No, that's a good project.
Okay, so the bids are due within a month.
Excellent. Yeah, I saw some engineering folks and city folks out there yesterday, as a matter of fact. So they're probably looking at that. Thank you.
So Mayor and Council, the next slide is what we've been indicating of projects that are in need of funding. So MAC, or the lighting replacement at the MAC, I believe the MAC lighting is about 20 years old, so they're looking to replace that lighting. Also, renovation of the Arizona Natural History Museum. Library has a couple of projects that is in need. Also, communications network. Falcon Field has a project, and then public safety, as we were talking about the public safety training facility. Police substation remodels. Our police substations are pretty old, some of them going back 1970s, and so we're looking to do a feasibility study and get some assessments done to be able to remodel some of those or actually all of them in the next, whenever we're able to find the funding for those. And then we have more streets projects that we're looking at. So the designs, as mentioned, are funded. However, the construction costs, because of the escalation of those estimates, we'll need to find some additional funding for the construction of those. And then just a laundry list of non-utility life cycle projects that we're looking at. Computer recycle, just the vehicle replacements. Police has a few life cycles of the radios, a bomb truck replacement, the command van, also some pavement maintenance, some storm channel maintenance, MAC equipment, and some transportation replacement end-of-life infrastructure. So it's just our normal life cycle that we look at every year to see what we need to replace. And with that is the end of my presentation.
All right. Council, any other questions?
I do have one question. When will we consider if we want to propose a 2026 bond package?
So Mayor, Council Member Duff, that discussions could start this fall. I know previously it would be up to, I believe, Mr. Brady of when we would want to start talking about some of those. I said previously. Now it'll be Mr. Butler that we will start talking about, okay, what do we want? What is it going to be looking for in projects and funding, and then start those discussions internally and then present to council.
Okay, in the fall. Okay,
We
thank
didn't
you.
do transport, it's been 2020 is the last time we did transportation, so in theory, that would be probably certainly one you'd want to consider. Especially with the new Prop 479 and the matches that may be required. And a lot of projects you saw from 2020 aren't going to make the funding because the funding got absorbed by the projects that are ahead. That may be something to consider.
Okay, Brian, thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Next, we'll move over to item 2B, presentation on water resources budget.
Be able to search a database.
Holly, how did that eSmart leadership thing, did it turn out okay? Okay.
But enthusiastic. You gotta get them in America 250. That'd be a good one. I'll talk to you later.
Oh. Do your presentation, then bring that up. You want to go right to it now?
Okay, I was thinking because this continues the CIP theme.
Right, but I thought I was thinking you could set the stage for your projects, that this would be relevant. Either way, I just thought maybe put it in context first.
Okay, we can do that. Let's go.
You're flexible.
Just as long.
Thank you.
There it is. Okay, we switched back. So we're going to start with our budget presentation. So we just
Listen,
finished.
Chris,
Sure.
we'll wait for Councilmember Spilsbury.
Okay, sure.
Yeah, thank you. She'll be right. She'll be right here. Okay, we're all back, Chris.
Okay,
Thank
all
you.
right, Mayor, Vice Mayor, Council, thank you. So I'm here today with Seth Weld, Deputy Director of Enterprise Finance. So we just wrapped up talking about capital projects. At the end of this, we'll go back to that theme because a question was raised by the Vice Mayor about capacity fee, just how we pay for growth. Some of this big infrastructure, pipelines, treatment plants, how we're paying for that. So we'll circle back to that. But getting back to the operations budget, getting into our presentation, I'm going to start with our purpose. So our purpose is to provide the community of Mesa with reliable, safe, economical, and environmentally sustainable water and wastewater services in a cost-effective manner. We're going to cover a few different objectives that are part of our annual plan. We're going to start with ensuring operational resiliency. So that's really optimizing our systems and preventing loss of service. And then we're going to talk about planning for resource and infrastructure adequacy. And when we talk about resources, it covers a lot of ground. So it's our water portfolio, naturally. It's also having quality staff and then infrastructure. And then finally, we're going to focus on quality. So supply high quality water and reclamation. So when we're talking about quality, it's really meeting regulations and standards. Before we get into the numbers, we're going to talk about 3 benchmark or performance measures. So this is one you've seen many times. So this is how we put to use our reclaimed water. So naturally, we want to be in that 90 to 100% range. So when we're talking about reclaimed water, so that is from 91st Avenue, that's water that is ours that goes to Palo Verde Nuclear Generating Station for cooling water. It's water we recharge at Grusp from the Northwest plant. It's reclaimed water from our other plants that goes down to the Gila River Indian Community today. And then when we finish the reuse pipeline, we're going to essentially double that capacity, which is that important exchange agreement where they use reclaimed water for agriculture, and in exchange we get CAP water. When you see us drop to a lower plateau, 80 to 90%, that typically means Grusp is out of service. And we've had a couple good winters, the last couple winters, so the water mounds in that region, and then they close down Grusp and we can't recharge there. So that's going to be fixed with the reuse pipeline. We won't have that problem. That's going to be 24/7, 365 water going down to the community, and then we'll get that cap water in exchange. And if you see a real sudden drop with some of those points on the graph, that typically means we have some kind of short-term operational issue that we have to work through. But the goal is to stay close to 100%. Now I'm going to talk about 2 that are related to our wastewater collection system, our sewer system. So this is miles of sewer line inspected, and our goal is 20 miles a month. In total, we have about 1,800 miles of sewer system. So doing 20 miles a month over 12 months, that gives us about 13% of the system that we're able to inspect every year. And when I talk about inspection, that means using our camera truck. It's our vendor camera truck, and it's an acoustic tool called the SLRAD, which sends sound waves through the pipe, and it looks for defects in the pipe or blockages. And then if we find those, then we can write up a work order and we know we have a problem there. You can see that last month, so in March, we shot above 30. So that's the highest we've ever done in a month. And it's an inflection point due to some changes structurally we've made over the last couple of years. And I'm going to talk about that more on the next slide. So staying with the collection system, the sewer system, this is miles of sewer cleaned. So this is our Vector trucks that go in and they jet out the sewer and they clean debris out of the sewer. And it's also our vendor. We have a vendor that does the same thing. They typically focus on the large diameter piping, and we take the smaller diameter piping. So the story I want to talk about here is you can see if you go all the way to the left and you go into summer of 2022, we're coming out of the pandemic. We're having some staffing issues. You can see we're really struggling with our numbers. We're not hitting our target. So there's 2 areas of concern we had to fix. First was with staffing, we had 1 supervisor over all of the wastewater collection crews. That's 21 people. And anytime you put 21 people under 1 person to supervise, you really end up in this state of paralysis, right? You're just trying to make it week to week, month to month. And the targets, I mean, yeah, they're there, but it's a struggle. So one of the first things we did going into 2023 is we created a second supervisor so we could break the team up into one supervisor would have 10, one would have 11. And then we also added a field coordinator. So the field coordinator can stay ahead of all the crews in the work orders and basically set up the week's worth of work for all the crews. So they're not in the past when it was a little less organized, they were coming in, it was maybe an hour or two before they realized what their work for the day was gonna look like, and then their efficiency and effectiveness would drop. So having a field coordinator and 2 supervisors, and then one last step is we added a superintendent, because now with this amount of responsibility, we only had one superintendent who was over all of the water distribution and all the wastewater collection. It's too much. Cities much smaller than us had it broken up with a superintendent over each area. So we had to make that right. We added a superintendent, we have the 2 supervisors, field coordinator planning the work, and you can see throughout 23 into 24, we jumped up, we started consistently hitting our target. The other side of the coin is equipment. So back in 2022, when we were struggling, we had 4 Vector trucks that were getting increasingly older and beat down. And at any given time, out of those 4 trucks, we would have 2, sometimes 3 of them in fleet for maintenance. So that was handicapping us pretty severely. So now we're up to 5 trucks. We changed out a couple older ones with newer ones. So you can see now we're much more consistent. And I really think we'll probably hit an inflection point with cleaning as well, because we also just got our new recycler truck in. That's with fleet right now, so they have to put the decals on it, the Mesa decals, and get the title and everything squared away. Once we get that, that's gonna give us a lot more effectiveness and efficiency, because the recycler truck, as opposed to a regular Vector truck, doesn't have to stop every hour and go to a fire hydrant and fill up the big tank. So a recycler truck, you jet out the sewer, but at the same time, you're vectoring out the dirty water into a tank that uses centrifugal force to basically split out the debris from the water, and you can reuse the water, and that truck can just go all day long. You don't have to stop, break down your traffic control, go to a hydrant. This is gonna up our efficiency. So I feel over the next year, 2 years, we're gonna get somewhere away from 20 miles per month and probably closer to 25, even 30 miles per month. So those are some big improvements we've made. And now I'm gonna turn over to Seth to get into some numbers.
Good morning. So this is a snapshot of our 3 years financial performance. The left-hand column shows our 23-24 actuals. Next 2 columns will be our 24-25 revised budget and our projections for the end of the year. And the final column will be our 25-26 proposed budget. One of the items that I want to highlight under the water distribution, the adopted budget for 24-25 was actually above 41 million. So part of what we have to do to get equipment purchased, we have the funding, but then we transfer that funding to fleet to complete the purchase. So we moved nearly $1 million over to fleet this year to get 2 large pieces of equipment. Additionally, we had to complete a risk and resilience study, and we had to move that money over to engineering because the contractor, or they hold the contract for that consultant. In the water treatment, we do have some challenges this year. The Val Vista water treatment plant, when we originally set the budget, they had planned on an outage in the fall, which is typical. After we got to the point where we were beginning the fiscal year, they notified us they had a higher priority at another plant. Sorry, Phoenix notified us. My apologies. Phoenix is the managing partner of the plant. So they notified us that they would not be doing that shutdown. So we have additional flows that we did not anticipate coming through that plant. Additionally, in 23-24, they exceeded their budget by about $6 million. So Mesa's portion that we will pay this year is about 1.4 million. So those 2 items are putting some pressure on the water treatment. The reclaim, that line is primarily our water commodities. So we do have a good news story here. Some of the thunder was stolen earlier this morning. Mesa was a participant in raising the Roosevelt Dam. It created what is called new conservation space, or we refer to it as NCS. That water, as Mayor Freeman pointed out, we can draw it down. We can use it anywhere in our system. It is significantly cheaper than the CAP water. So beginning with the current calendar year, we actually reduced our CAP order, and we're going to draw that NCS water down and use it in the system.
Yeah, I want to add that 20.2 million for our proposed budget for, it says reclaim, so think of the water we buy, the SRP water. The bulk of the cost is the CAP water. That number should be about $2 million higher just because of the rising cost of CAP. CAP water costs half of what it did, what it does now about 5 years ago. So that's how aggressively that unit cost has went up. But we decided to order 10% less CAP water this next year, and in place of that, pull down the new conservation space water storage we own behind Roosevelt Dam. That water is only about $42 an acre foot. Cap water is now over $300 an acre foot. So by replacing 10% of that really expensive water with this NCS water that we have, we're able to shave a couple $1 million.
You can use that water off project?
That's the beauty of it. Yes, Mayor, Vice Mayor.
The NCS.
So the way to think about it is when SRP lands were created, On Project was created over a century ago, there's that water that was calculated, but when Roosevelt Dam was raised, there was new money brought to the table to create new storage. So the way you look at it is that can be used anywhere in the city, and that's typically where we do. We move it east immediately and use it in the CAP area.
Which is what you'll talk about later in the Roosevelt, is another project in that direction. Okay, Bartlett, yeah, thank you.
Mr. Reddy.
That was kind of my question. But is this how when the water central use pipeline goes into effect? Is this how we would kind of credit or label that water that we're getting credits for?
Mayor, or Councilmember Heredia. No, it's a little different.
A little different, okay.
Yeah, it's not coming out of the SRP system at all. Okay. So the reclaimed water that we deliver to the Gila River Indian community, they use for farming. They're the biggest cap rates holder in the state. Our exchange agreement, we exchange the recycled water. They give us CAP water that we order. But that's a lot cheaper. I think what you're thinking is the cost.
It would be a lot cheaper, right? So the cost would be...
It's about $105 an acre foot for that. We're just paying the energy component of that CAP water. But when we buy our own M&I, municipal and industrial CAP water, it's $305. Yeah. It's a $200 delta. But with NCS, it's only $42 an acre foot. So the delta's huge.
That's fair, okay. Mm-hmm. And when does it go online again?
February of next year.
February next year, okay.
Okay, so the next page is a snapshot on the wastewater side. The collection side remains pretty stable, pretty flat. The wastewater treatment side, we are going to come in a little under budget this year. That is primarily the Schrag plant. Even though the Schrag plant did exceed their budget, like Val Vista did, as was Phoenix. Oh, okay. Phoenix. We are one of the 5 member cities.
We're seeing a theme.
Yes. As was mentioned earlier, part of the effluent that comes out of the Schrag plant, we do sell that water to the Arizona Nuclear Power Plant. Additionally, they do collect the methane gas, treat it, clean it, and they sell that gas. So fortunately, at the end of the year, we share in that revenue. So even though they exceeded their budget, we're getting about $1.4 million back from last year that will be applied this year.
Mr. Brady, have the partners discussed why Phoenix seems to keep overspending on these shared projects?
You're in those meetings.
We're getting, our budget is getting drug into somebody else's. I don't want to get too aggressive on this, but there is a spending issue. So what's the issue?
I've been involved in Schrag for about 17 years now, and historically, I think before inflation became more persistent, this wasn't an issue. They're struggling with a lot of the same operational issues we are with chemicals, and well, they're unionized as well. So
their labor costs are a little different.
The effect on their labor is much different than ours. We do have a voice, just like the other Shorrock partners, and we do push back on projects. And between us pushing back and the other partners, that has caused them to pause and delay things. So it's not like they don't do this autonomously. We're able to have a voice as well.
Yeah, which I understand, but at some point, those projects are going to have to get built because the system has to be continuous investment in order to make sure that we have water.
It's the kind of, we understand rising costs and all that. I think it's kind of more it's happening kind of without a lot of head-up notice, maybe, to me, it seems like. We don't always anticipate those significant, seeing those ahead. Now, we've experienced those too, but this is significant. But we're in a regional partnership. We don't have to have those treatment plants in Mesa, Arizona, right? We can send it all the way to 91st Avenue, which is way far away. But they have their own challenges. I wish we had a little more predictability, as much as you can in these days, looking out into the future. That would probably be my biggest request, is to kind of more
I would agree
anticipate
with that, and that's just, I don't have any specific direction on this, but it's a little concerning to hear it over and over and over again, that you came in under budget on our operations, and then that one is over budget, and to try to get that under control, at least give us some more runway so that if it is going to be over budget, we can make those adjustments. Something to work on as you come into your office, Scott. Thank you.
Well, there are some positives. I mean, you're telling us we get a return on some of the methane gas recovery, as well as selling the water, and then the overall cost to run the plant. I mean, we have similar costs with our Northwest treatment plant, wastewater plant. I mean, other than, there's some parallels there. There might be some difference in the labor costs, but other than that, pipes and pumps and all the equipment it takes to run it, chemicals.
Yeah, these are old plants. They're the two biggest plants in the state. So the 91st Avenue plant is the biggest wastewater plant in the state. Bella Vista is the biggest water treatment plant in the state. And they're both old plants. I think Phoenix does a good job. We do push back, especially lately. There's things that we push back pretty aggressively if we feel like it could be delayed or maybe the scope changed.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Adams?
Quick question. Who determines the price of the methane gas and the water that we push out to Palo Verde? Do we negotiate that, or is that a overall contractual rate, and how does that determine? And the other question I had, if I can roll back a little bit, you don't have to go back in the slides, but you were talking about the number of supervisors, number of employees, whatever per, and what would you say, we have 1,800 miles of sewer. Is the mileage of sewer kind of the basis of standard in your industry that says we're operating very efficiently with 20 employees and some other city with 900 miles has got 40 people? Is that, how do you base your operational efficiency and number of vehicles, number of people, or is there a standard? Just curious.
Sure, Mayor, Councilmember Adams. I'll start with the efficiency question. So pipes have a lot to do with it. Because you have your goals, how much you need to get through, and then you need to know how many crews you need and equipment. But then there's other assets that we have under that umbrella. So we also have 14 lift stations. And so when we split it up with two supervisors, we actually have one supervisor doing all the pipelines. So that's all the pipelines, the manhole rehab, everything linear. And the other supervisor has 14 lift stations. And then we have, I think, around 25 or 30 diversion structures. So those are just bigger manholes that have gates and you're moving water around. And then we have 21 odor control stations. That's our ferrous chloride. That's the chemical we use for odor control. And then we have one biofiltration station on baseline. And then we have all the reclaim lines. We have air release valves. So you have to look at the totality of all your assets and just making sure you're keeping up. That's really your gauge, your barometer. Are we keeping up with all the work we need to do, spread across all those disciplines? And that's really what drives our staffing. I think we're at a good staffing level now. I think it was that leadership level that was now allowing us to be efficient, and we're there. So I can't see us adding any staff for quite some time. I think we're good there. Now the focus has been on the equipment, and I think we're pretty good there as well. And then to answer your questions on digester gas, that was a process, so I think I was still this was like 9 years ago, I was still at Scottsdale and representing, because Schrog has Scottsdale as a city. We negotiated the contract with the current vendor. I think they came up with it was a competitive process, I think is the best way to answer your question. And the vendor we awarded it to was wheeling the gas to entities in California, and they offered the best price to purchase that gas. And then with the reclaimed water that goes to Palo Verde, that was also, a study was done. There was a negotiation done with the entity that owns Palo Verde. And then there was an initial price, and then there was a set of escalations that would ramp up over 20 years. So in fact, now the price is pretty good for us partners in terms of what we get for a return of that reclaimed water. And it's even having APS look at other options for reclaimed water at Palo Verde, like brackish water around Buckeye. They're looking at other options because it has ramped up to a point where we're getting a very competitive price.
Well, thank you. That pretty much answers what was going to be my follow-up question. I was wondering if there was any opportunity there to offset some of Phoenix's, shall we say, unpredictability or increases that we're dealing with, but it doesn't sound like there is.
We're getting really good market competitive prices, both for that scrub digester gas as well as the reclaimed water. And then the one thing I was going to add on this table, you can see that the revised budget for wastewater collection is 7.6. It's staying pretty stable, only going up to 7.7. The good news story here is the chemical costs that we've been talking about the last year or so, where certain chemicals like ferrous chloride has doubled in price. That's gone away. Things have leveled off and stabilized considerably. So that's at least one good news size we're seeing out there.
Okay, so as you've heard, all of the departments were requested to propose 2% reductions from the base budget. I just want to be clear, we have some very large items that are not included in our base budget. I'll cover those on the next slide. So this is only off of those items included in the base budget. From the utility fund, we have proposed a little over $814,000 to be reduced, and off of the Greenfield operating fund, a little over $8,000. So the method we went through when we looked at this, we took a look at all of our historical spend against the budget, and we had numerous line items that we had not spent up to the full budget. So we went in and began reducing those. One of the real good news areas where we're making a reduction is on the advertising. Just a couple of years ago, we had 2 plants that were at about half staff. And so we aggressively were doing nationwide advertising, nationwide recruitment. And I'm happy to say today, we have 3 openings. We've made tremendous headway. So we're going to go ahead and make a reduction in those advertising costs. Unfortunately, here are the big items. So the Val Vista plant, they are experiencing a 7% increase in their personal services, a 7% increase in contracted services, and increases in their outside materials and supplies. Now, part of the contracted services and materials and supplies for the next year, they do have an extended shutdown scheduled, so they will be doing a little bit more maintenance than they typically would. So that's some of that increase in this next year. On our water chemicals, because of the extended shutdown at Val Vista, both of our plants will not have a shutdown and will be operating all 12 months. So this is driven just from increased usage, not from a price increase. The water electric, this is taking into account a proposed SRP increase, as well as that continued usage at the plants, and the methodology bringing the NCS water through our transfer stations into the east side service territory. As we mentioned, the good news story on the water purchases, because we've made this change and we're not as reliant on the CAP water, we've actually got a budget decrease. I think that's a tremendous story considering that the CAP rate is going up and we were still able to bring that down. On the wastewater side, the 91st Avenue plant, that is a large hit. Same thing, 7% increase on their personal services, about a 5% to 6% on third-party contracted services, and escalating costs on their outside parts and supplies. On the wastewater chemical side, we have increased flows that are going through the collection system and at the Greenfield plant. So this is simply due to those increased flows, we're going to have increased usage. The wastewater electric, same thing. The increased flows, we're going to have an increased usage at the plants for those items. On the biosolids removal, additional flow in the plant generates more biosolids that need to be removed. Another good news story on the Greenfield side, our partners are actually growing at a higher rate than we are, so their usage of the plant is more than ours. So our share of the operation of that plant is going to go down. I wanted to try and illustrate in this pie chart how significant those large items are in our overall budget. This represents, in the blue slice, that is our personal services cost against our utility fund and Greenfield fund. If you'll see in kind of the lower orange piece, our joint venture obligations, Val Vista and Schrog, it's 22% of our overall budget. Our utilities, another 8%. Then in the yellow slice of pie, just buying the raw water, it's 16% of our overall budget. And then we've got 7% of our budget to treat that water. So those are the most significant items within our budget.
Okay, now we're going to switch over and we're going to pick up something that was started to be discussed earlier, the Bartlett Dam feasibility study. So we're talking about this in the O&M side of things because at this point, we're still in the feasibility phase. At some point down the line, it would become a capital project, but it takes years of, especially when you have a lot of stakeholders at the table. And that's what this cost is, one-time cost $100,000. That's our cost to be at the table with all the other stakeholders, go through the process. We're about 2 years into it right now. We've already passed the allocation phase. So there's a pie chart for that too. If you take all the stakeholders, our slice of the pie, the new storage that would be created by building a new Bartlett Dam and increasing the size of that reservoir would be 28,000 acre feet. Now, there's a little nuance here, and it's like the Roosevelt Dam, the storage we created there. Because the dam, you may have raised the dam, but the storage is not always full. It depends, it ebbs and flows year to year, depending on if it's a wet year or a dry year. So you take the storage, the allocation you have, you essentially divide by 3.5. In this case, that would take us to 8,000 acre foot. So for the purposes of our 100-year assured water supply designation, it's that 8,000 acre foot every year that shows up as boosting our portfolio. For comparison, when we raised the Roosevelt Dam and Mesa contributed and bought some of that storage, our annual amount is 12,000 acre foot. So if you add up the two, that's 20,000 acre foot of water, of extra storage space, and the SRP system that can be used to offset CAP water. That's our real goal because we know the current guidelines on the Colorado River will result in cuts. And we really don't know how severe those cuts are going to be yet. There's not a lot of visibility out there at this point, but when those cuts come, we want to have water sources in our portfolio that can replace those cuts. And the other side of this is the exchange with the Gila River Indian community. We're also going to take the amount of water we get from them right now is about 8,000 acre foot with the 2 plants that do discharge down to their fields. But when the Central Mesa Reuse Pipeline is done, we're going to double that up, closer to actually 20,000. So of 20,000 in exchange CAP water from the tribal community, we'll have almost 20,000 between Roosevelt and NCS. That's 40,000. That is actually just shy of our total municipal and industrial share of CAP, which is about 43,000. To give you an idea, and I talk about acre feet in the thousands, just to give you a little more context, 1,000 acre foot is enough to serve about 4,500 homes that use our median amount of 6,000 gallons per month. So you can think about every acre foot adds about 4.5 homes. So 1,000 acre foot batches that we talk about, every 1,000 acre foot is about 4,500 homes. So when you start talking about 10, 20, 40,000 acre foot, that's a tremendous amount of water that we're boosting our portfolio. So the one-time cost is it's $100,000 to continue the study. We have to go through the NEPA process. It's a federal process. It would go through an EIS, and then it would need congressional approval for the funding for the federal portion. And then full design and construction would start. I don't think it's going to be a 10-year project. I think we could be in a position where design could start in a few years. Design might last a couple of years, so construction could be half a dozen years out. The big question mark for us right now is the price tag. That's been a moving target, so we really need to keep an eye on that. And then just as we look at that compared to all of our other options for boosting our portfolio, we just have to keep watching that, because if the price starts to get too expensive, it might start to now pace ahead of other options that we have to increase our portfolio. So it's a constant state of being vigilant and just looking at all our options. And then related to that is the SCIF, which is the next item. It's the SRP CAP interconnect facility. Why this is important is that this gives us a mechanism to move water from the SRP system. You can see in that picture below, the South Canal is the SRP system. That's how we get water to the Bella Vista treatment plant right now for our on-project water. Pump station and pipeline would push that water up the hill, dump it into the CAP canal. So let me explain why that's important for Mesa. Right now, our NCS water, and in the future, Bartlett water, would go down the South Canal several miles, go to the Bella Vista water treatment plant, be treated there at a cost of almost $1,000 a million gallons. And then we'd have to make that water do a 180, come around, pump it back up to East Mesa with big 200 horsepower pumps. And then there's a big cost there just to get it to East Mesa. With the SCIF, we basically just coordinate with SRP. We say we want to take some of our NCS water, pump it up into the CAP canal. As soon as it gets in the CAP canal, a short distance is our Brown Road plant. There we treat it for about $350 per million gallons, not $1,000 a million gallons. So it's a more direct route, and it goes to our Brown Road plant. We treat it for a lot less unit cost per million gallons. And then downstream from that is our Signal Butte plant. So we could actually spread that water between the two plants depending on where the demand is for that day or that season. So that's an important project. It's also a one-time cost of about $97,000. And that's for, again, we're in the feasibility stage. We're not quite at design yet, but that also has to go through the federal permitting process.
Right, we have a question.
Yeah, I have a question just to understand it. So we're sending untreated, it's not raw water, right? It's untreated water in the CAP canal with the raw water? Is that correct? I'm just trying to understand.
Mayor, Council Member Duff. Yeah, it's all raw water. It's all untreated.
All raw
CAP
water.
Is Colorado River water, and
Right.
From the SRP system, it's coming from the reservoirs. It's the same.
Okay, so it's not already used. Okay, and then at one point, there was a discussion about the Horseshoe Dam, or like dredging that. Is there a study, or is that a dead
No, you're correct.
project?
That was studied. The decision was to just, because there's a lot of sediment buildup and deposition behind the dam, the study was done, can we basically dredge out all of that sediment and try to buy more capacity there, and it wasn't cost effective. So the decision was made, let's make the new Bartlett Dam bigger and higher, create a bigger lake there, and then the Horseshoe Reservoir would just be used as like a sediment deposition area.
It'd take over 50 years to dredge Horseshoe out to make it compatible for storage. It's going to be mainly a riparian area for waterfowl and migration.
It's better to use that dam to just let the sediment drop out, and then you get cleaner water going into this bigger lake you're going to create at Bartlett. And then the final item, also related, is the joint water quality study. It's a one-time study. So the water quality in the SRP system is different. It's a little more difficult to treat than the CAP water. So if we're going to pump water from the SRP system, dump it up into the CAP canal, it's going to go to our treatment plants that traditionally treat CAP water quality. So there's more turbidity and there's more total organic carbon in the SRP system. So turbidity makes your filters work harder. The carbon, it makes you use more ozone and chemicals. It has more potential for formation of disinfection byproducts. So we want to do a study our consultant to look at different ratios of SRP and CAP water to see where's our threshold where it could be difficult for us to treat at our CAP plants, and is that going to be a problem? And this is just real quick, this is a percentage of groundwater. So we try to minimize our groundwater pumping. We want to keep that as low a percentage as we can in terms of the overall water demand in our system year to year. So our goal is to stay below 10% of the water that we deliver to our customers to be pumped from the ground. We want to preserve that source as much as possible. So you can see over the last few years, we've done a good job at staying at 10% or lower. So this is on the water quality side, and this really speaks to some unfunded federal mandates. So there's two items here. One is the lead and copper rule and all of the work that goes with that. So we're way down the road in terms of the field work that we've done, but there's still some work to do. There's about 3,000 properties where we're required to go in and verify the type of material that the service is. We're looking for lead, and I should back up. Mesa's been very fortunate because we're a newer city. We're not like an old Midwest city like Cleveland, or you get to the East Coast, there's a lot more lead. We're finding virtually no lead, so that's good. But it's a very time and labor intensive process to conform with this mandate, and it takes time. We're over the hump. I think at the peak, it was either last year or the year before, we were up around 400,000. We're down to about 150,000 and tapering off quite a bit. The money we're asking for, we didn't break this out of the 251, about 160 of that is for the lead and copper, and it's to get a couple more temp workers, because we've been using temp workers and we've been using our water distribution workers to work overtime to knock out all this field work. It's just a lot of field work. So we want to continue with using just a couple temp workers, and then there's other work that we have to do. There's, I should mention that the next phase of this is a 3-year phase, doing sampling, voluntary sampling for schools and daycares. So there's a rigorous process where we do outreach to all the schools, all the daycare facilities, and we send them a letter. We say, here's what we're gonna do. Here's the process you can follow. Here's who you can reach out to with questions. Here's our website. It's very intensive in terms of the outreach, and then it just leaves it up to the schools and the daycare if they want to have us come out and do samples and reporting. So there's some money that's going to be needed for that process as well. That rolls up into this request.
Quick question, please. Mr. Hassert, what is polyfluoroalkyl, if I pronounced that right?
The polyfluoroalkyl substances is PFAS. There's a whole variety of constituents under that family, if you will. There's PFAS, PFOS, and then there's just a whole laundry list of other compounds. They're multi-chain fluorine chemicals. A lot of it was used for firefighting foam at airports and air bases. It's used in your frying pan at home if it's lined with Teflon, Gore-Tex. There's a list of products, and they call it a forever chemical because it doesn't break down biologically. If it gets in your body, it bioaccumulates. So it's a fairly new standard that we have to follow, and we measure in the parts per trillion. And that's why we have a request, because we don't have the lab equipment to measure down to parts per trillion for this kind of constituent, so we use an outside lab.
So is this similar to the kind of thing that you have all the law firms advertising about? If you served at Camp Lejeune from this period of time, whatever, is there a potential for that kind of problem? That kind of public liability?
I think those commercials are focusing on something different.
Okay.
But it's probably only a matter of time before there's commercials related to this. Now, there are some large settlements, 3M and DuPont, and they've already agreed to settle for X amount, but there's a many-year process that's going to be needed to determine who gets what from that. We are party to, I think, the 3M lawsuit.
So we're a plaintiff?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you.
Jim's next job. Make some money. There you go.
And again, we've been very, very fortunate in terms of PFAS. We took proactive steps. We put it out an RFP a couple of years ago for wellhead treatment if we needed it. And so we got ahead of the game. We have some vendors that we have available that if we ever needed it, for a well that we just couldn't take down and we wanted to treat at the wellhead. But we've been just so fortunate in terms of our sampling process and not finding that much. But we do have to follow the sampling protocol. It does cost money, and that's part of the request. So that speaks to this bar graph. So if you look at fiscal years 22, 23, and 23, 24, the dark blue are outside lab testing we already do. So we already use outside labs for testing pesticides, herbicides, dioxins, uranium, mercury, a list of things like that we don't have the equipment for. So now we add PFAS to the mix, that's the orange. So our current fiscal year, you can see there's the dark blue, that's the money we've already spent, and then the remaining to be spent for the other services. And then you have PFAS samples that we're doing. And then you can see next year, the PFAS jumps up a little bit more because now we're going to be required to do more intensive PFAS testing. And our last request has to do with, this is the only one that's an ongoing request. It's $75,000. This is to raise fire hydrants that sit too low. So you can see, this is the same hydrant, but on the left, you can see the pumper nozzle is too close to finished grade, and then fire department personnel, they can't turn the wrench when they get on it to open up and get the water they need. So there's an 18-inch requirement with AWWA to get from finished grade to the center of the pumper nozzle. So we already have a backlog of about 492 of these, but we're running out of money because it comes out of our regular warehouse equipment and supply budget, which has not gone up, it stayed the same. So there's less we can accomplish. So we're asking for money to get those extension pieces so that we can take care of some of that backlog. And then this graph speaks to that. You can see that we're increasing our productivity every year. This is year to date under 2025. If you do the math and say, well, that's one quarter, you're gonna be just over 400. So we're dropping a little bit this year, and that's because we're gonna run out of money. So that's why we have the request. We want to get the money to purchase those risers, those barrel risers.
So this simply summarizes those additional enhancement requests that Chris just spoke about. The Bartlett Dam and the SCIF. We are looking to fund that through the MCAP available funding. The Joint Water Quality Study we would fund through the Utility Fund. Everything related to the lead and copper rule and the PFAS analytic services, we would utilize the Environmental Compliance Fund. And then on the last item, as Chris said, it's an ongoing and would be in the Utility Fund.
So Mayor and Council, just quickly, MCAP, that's general governmental fund. That's what comes out of the general fund. Utility fund, and those obviously are covered by the utility revenues. And I think we had this conversation, was it last week? Anyway, the Environmental Compliance Fund is funded by a fee that shows up on every utility bill. It's at what is it at now? $750. So that covers, this is a great example of these unfunded mandates that are passed on to the city, and that's where that fee covers that cost.
And that was everything that we had on the budget.
What I didn't hear, where are you drilling your next wells at?
Well, right now, Mayor Freeman, we have one well we've drilled, Desert Well 7. It's a redrill, and that's going out to bid in a couple weeks. We've got really, really high prices when we do a qualifications-based selection. Then you're taking all the competitiveness out of it, and then you're paying what the contractor says, here's what I want. We've been seeing some bright spots with competitive bidding. We had 2 bids just in the last month or so. Both of them came in under our budget, and I haven't seen that in 6 years. So we're going to bid this as a canary in the coal mine, and if the bids are as promising as I expect, the competitive bids, we have up to 4 more wells we've already drilled in Southeast Mesa that we're going to then package those in some fashion and put those out for bid as well. Okay. There's only one well we're drilling right now, Desert Well 33. They're doing some site work this week, and they'll probably start drilling in the next couple of weeks. That's also
Location of that.
Southeast Mesa.
Okay.
Up in North Mesa, we've been looking at the Bella Vista Water Treatment Plant. We've already talked to Phoenix since we co-own it. And we've had a discussion about a recovery well on the site. They're fine with it. But that's really as far as the discussion has went. And the reason we're targeting that location is because it's in the area of impact of GRUSP. And it's also in the area of impact for RWCD, where we have all our long-term storage credits between those two, for the most part. And having well there means that we'll be able to just recover some of our long-term storage credits if we need to offset cap cuts down the road. If we're not in those areas, the area of impact, if we're not in designated areas with our recovery wells, then it counts against, it's just like pumping water anywhere in the city. It's counting against our allocation that we have in our 100-year assured water supply. And it's not the end of the world, but ideally you want to have a well that's right there in your recharge site, so it counts separately. So that's what we're doing. We're also kicking off a study right now with a consultant, a hydrogeological study that looks at the area of impact around the GRUSP recharge site. And there's a process you can follow through ADWR where it's called the AOHI, Area of Hydraulic Impact, where the hydrogeologist does hydraulic modeling, shows that you don't need to stop at 1 mile around GRUSP. That's too limiting. Based on the subsurface hydraulics, you can actually extend that boundary out. And we're about to kick off that scope. We'll go meet with DWR, just let them know what we're doing. Other cities are doing that. Scottsdale's doing that around their water campus. They're doing the same study to extend out the boundary. The reason we're doing that is because if we extend the boundary and we intuitively think it'll stretch is along the Salt River, that will pick up 2 or 3 wells we already own and operate every day. So without having to pay 1 cent of infrastructure costs, we'll just change the boundary and then be able to use those 2 or 3 wells to pump long-term storage credits. So that's at the top of our list because that doesn't cost anything other than the study.
Okay, good. All right, hearing nothing else, thank you.
Did you want to talk about the capacity?
Oh,
real quick.
Give a highlight. We're planning on bringing this to council. Just the overall concept. This gets into a lot of details, so we're going to come to a council subcommittee first. So the concept is just kind of high level,
Yeah.
maybe without going to slides. What's the attempt? What are we trying to attempt here?
I'll give the couple-minute version or 5-minute version. So we had water and wastewater impact fees in Mesa, and the legislation changed several years ago, made it a very onerous process, difficult to follow. Mesa chose to have a glide path for those impact fees and sunset. That's where we're at right now. Our impact fees are sunsetting. So we're talking about new development, and it's a fee. It's not a rate. Impact fees are a fee that a developer would pay, whether it's a new house or if master plan community, the developer is going to pay for all the lots and it's baked into the cost of your house. Or if you're building a strip mall, right? That's a new development. There'd be an impact fee. We don't have the impact fees. Most cities have impact fees. We're looking at a model successfully employed by Flagstaff. It's a capacity fee because we're looking at what is the concrete, the steel, the new infrastructure we need specifically for growth. For instance, the Signal Butte plant is a perfect example. We're expanding that plant right now. If we didn't have more growth down the pike in Southeast Mesa, we wouldn't need to expand that plant, right? So that's an example of we're expanding that plant. There's new pipelines, there's new pumping capacity. We're looking at just the infrastructure, and to do this in a phased-in approach, we're looking at just the next 5 years. And from our master plan, we have about $280 million worth of growth projects that we need to do over the next 5 years, 6 years. So, and we have about 20,000 undeveloped vacant parcels. So we used a methodology to come up with, starting with a 3/4 inch meter and then scaling it up based on the bigger meters, what would a capacity fee amount to for that new development to pay for the new development rather than all the existing ratepayers having to pay for that growth.
So that's the key. We will bring that to the council committee to go in those details and bring it to the full committee. But the point is, if we don't have a fee, just like today, we're having to expand plants for new growth. but then every ratepayer shares in the cost of those new facilities. The idea here is to say, wait, no, if you're coming in new growth and we can show you specifically that new growth is having this kind of impact, they would charge a specific fee to them and not apply that across the impact of the utility rates across the whole city. So we'll bring the details and develop this concept to get it to council. We'd like to get it in place before the fall, I think is the goal.
So will it be, sorry, Mary, can I?
Go ahead, yeah.
Will it be a restricted revenue then for those improvements? And
Yeah, you'd have to show that
Are we
connection.
gonna-
I think you'd have to show that connection. The development will want to know that that's what it's doing.
Yeah, well, I think we would too, because we don't want to spend it today, and the purpose of it is to pay for those additional costs due to growth, and yet we maybe spend it today on something else, so.
Right. The money would be collected in a phased approach, right, as development came in, and then the spending also would be phased.
We do that with development fees. We've done that for development fees in the past too.
I have another question.
A few questions. Back on slide 10, there's 3 questions. Back on slide 10, I'm looking at the variance, particularly for water, chemicals, and electric between the Val Vista plant and SROG. And it seems to vary considerably. For example, chemicals, the Val Vista plant, where the variance is almost double what SROG is. But on electric, SROG is about 3 times more cost for their electric variance compared to ours. What's the difference? Why are their costs for chemicals, for example, not as high as ours, or the variance?
Sure. Mayor, Vice Mayor, let's take a look at that slide. So you're saying Val Vista's more
Yeah, if you look at the
expensive?
percentages, 24, 25 to the variance and divide it, the water chemicals, for example, our costs are over 14% in variance. The variance is 14%, and SROG's is about 8. But we save a lot on electric. Theirs is like 8, shot up considerably compared to ours. Is there a reason why? Is it just service area? Is it the amount of chemicals they buy so that their variance is smaller because they're buying more bulk?
With electric, the thing about the Val Vista plant, electric is a big component there because they're lifting the water out of the South Canal. Because the plant, the finished grade of the plant is pretty high compared to the South Canal, so it's massive pumping, and that's why it's more expensive than our Brown Road treatment plant, because Brown Road sits right there.
Comparing a water treatment plant to a wastewater treatment facility?
So it's a different,
So there may be different
Yeah,
processes.
There's different
I'm assuming.
processes there.
So
that answers
the
that.
energy, the chemicals are very different, right? I mean,
You're going to be more chemical intensive at wastewater. You're going to
Yep.
be more electric
That's my
intensive only in this case because Val Vista sits up on that bluff.
yeah, that was my answer right there. Great.
Okay,
Okay, slide 13, joint water quality study on this. Not too long ago, we were doing the interconnects down at the Signal Butte treatment, and so that required that we put that area of Mesa on well water, which was very warm to start and it had a bit of an odor to it. Usually it mixes with the CAP. Will this study be looking a little bit at that mixture down there? Because if we go on well water, again, it's pretty hot. It feels like summer water in the middle of winter.
Right, Mayor, Vice Mayor. It's a pretty rare instance where we would have to go all on well water. You probably
Yeah.
would go years before you would have to do that for another period of time. I'm trying to think of the schedule and sequence of work left at Signal Butte. Maybe there might be one more shutdown. The well water it does run hot there. It runs 85 to 95 degrees.
And you mentioned, the reason I bring this up is you mentioned in your presentation, you're talking about what's the right mix of waters in here as part of this study. And my concern would be if we shift it too much to well water in that area for whatever reason, then the water temperature goes up and I think the water quality goes down a little bit because of we get some odors that come out of the well water. So I just want to know if we're going to be looking at that as part of this study, or
But we're not, the difference here is that for that part of the service area to be fed by mostly or exclusively well water is going to be really rare. It's a rarity where it's an everyday situation, the blend between SRP and CAP.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, it felt like the middle of August in the middle of February.
Save on
We got,
Yeah, lots of hot showers. That
hot
was,
showers, laundry,
but that,
dishwasher.
yeah, that puts,
Well, your water heater wasn't working as hard, Scott.
no, that's true. And then the final one was slide 17, so we're looking at the fire hydrant thing. Have we quantified what maintenance of these hydrants means for the insurance ISO rating for the city, for its fire department? And two, how does that equate to insurance costs for homeowners? What we're seeing a lot of that coming out of the wildfires in California, fairly or unfairly, is the inspection of fire hydrants and the availability of water. And that's increasing the cost of insurance, and we're not seeing it limited to California. It's spreading, it's being redlined even in Arizona. In talking to some folks, it seems like fire hydrant maintenance is one of the key issues that could help keep our insurance costs down for our homeowners. And by improving our ISO reading, have we looked at what that is and what those costs are?
We track that. So a couple ways to look at it. So the NFPA requirement, or what the recommended interval is, every 5 years you want to maintain a hydrant. We're at every 2, but then if you look at AWWA, they recommend that you're maintaining a hydrant every year. So we're double that, but we're significantly less than NFPA. In terms of answering how that relates to the insurance rates, I'd have to reach out to some other folks, do some homework for you on that, because I'm not as in tune with the insurance side of it.
Okay, because this is one area, talking to your office and the fire department independently, where I think we can make an impact, one for public safety and two, the cost of homeowner insurance. So I want to keep having these conversations.
It would just, it's pretty straightforward work. It would be more staff. We do our goal is 866 hydrants per month. So we're around 10,000. We're better than that. We typically are closer to 900. So we're a little bit better than that 10,000 a year. It says we have 20,000 hydrants. I think we're a little closer to 21,000 now. So it's really just adding the staff it would take to just have that throughput.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Goforth, did you have a question?
This is more for Mr. Brady, but so this idea of we're reducing our base budget by 2%. So what the concept of the base budget, what does that entail? What is the base budget? What are you saying is the base budget?
So the budget sits down with the departments and comes up with kind of like the continuing on, go ahead, Brian.
Yes, Mayor, Councilmember Goforth. So what the base budget consists of for a specific department is the personal services. So we got 3 different categories. We have the personal services. We also have commodities, and then also services contracts. So those 3 things that we take, so how we calculate their base budget is we take the adopted budget from the previous fiscal year, or for instance, moving forward, the 24-25, their ongoing base budget that they had adopted last year. We take any enhancements, additions, staff, things like that. We add that becomes their new base budget for 25-26. So that we calculate the 2% on. The other budget adjustments the utilities were talking about is their baseline. So we have 2 different things. Their base budget is that 2% that's ongoing. We know that, okay, if we need to reduce or increase, we know what it is in the forecast. The baseline is a little bit different to where they can adjust it year over year because of fluctuations in the markets. For instance, like the commodities or the chemicals. They increase significantly. So it gives the department a chance to raise those because we know it's part of their operations. We know they need to have it. So they can raise it. They work with OMB to take a look at, review the contracts, review the expenses to make sure, okay, we're in line and it works throughout the forecast. So there's the two different distinctions. One is we collaborate with them because we know the fluctuation of the market can go up and down.
But the adjustments are being made in the base budget.
In the base
To the base
budget.
budget. What is not included in the base budget?
Just, so what included for the utilities is their chemicals, their contract with Schrag and also 91st Avenue, Brown Road.
That's not, these are not
That is
included.
not in their base budget because what happens is they still need that to run the plants and it fluctuates. And so we said, you know, we'll take those to the side. We'll adjust those as we need to be able to run the plants and run this. So the ongoing of your training, of your travel, of your purchases of office equipment or any, we stayed away from personal services unless it was vacant. So, but here, this is what we call baseline. So on the slide is the Val Vista water treatment obligation. So as you see, that increased $1.3 million. So that is, we said, you know what, we need that. That's a contractual agreement. So we need to move forward with that adjustment. So we put that in the budget. So same with the water chemicals. Water chemicals, they're going up 315,000. But if you go down to water purchases, as you saw in the last couple of years, those have increased significantly by a couple $1 million. Now they're having a reduction because of purchasing less of some of that water. So we allow them to adjust their budget down. So this gives them the chance to move their budget up and down off of that base budget.
I guess I'm a bit confused on how each department determines their base budget.
So each department is the same. So each department looks at, we take their personal services and then any of their other contractual services, for instance, for finance, their audit fees, or for us, it's our forecasting fees, things like that, or any travel training, any books that we need for just our normal operations of the department. We take those and say, okay, these are the ongoing that we had in our base budget for this coming up year. We need to be able to reduce that as a net 2%. So we take
then-
that.
Okay, so that makes sense. But then how do you determine in each department what gets pulled out as
So-
allowed for this adjustment summary?
So
So Brian, what's exempt? So this is,
Yeah.
you're getting an
And it
extreme
seems
example
exempt-
here.
Yes.
This
Each
is an
department has a different exemption.
Right, but you don't have departments that have contractual obligations in a multi-regional, regional where, we're part of the conversation, but we're not
Absolutely.
controlling this. That doesn't really happen in the majority of other departments. They don't have those kinds of exceptions
Okay.
in their baseline budget that we're taking the 2% from.
But it seemed like every presentation, maybe I'm not remembering right, there were things pulled out of the baseline budget that got to be adjusted. No? Am I?
No, I don't think
So
so.
every department started with pretty much their full budget as their base budget.
Right,
Yes.
right. What you saw, I think, a few
Okay.
times where they might have been asking for something, and then in addition to 2%, if there's an addition to their budget, then they had to find another decrease to cover that enhancement in their year. But I don't think we got into the base.
No, so Mayor, Councilmember Goforth, what they have done is their reduction target was, say, for instance, $800,000. So that was their reduction target. So we took their base budget and said, okay, what's 2% of their base budget? It was $800,000. So what they did is they took whatever they did to reduce that $800,000. And then what Mr. Brady was just indicating is that, okay, you know what, we need to add more staff to this resource, this program over here. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna pull these additional things out and reduce those to be able to fund and reallocate those other programs.
And I remember that, and I understand that, but I guess I'm just wanting to make sure that I understand that when you are using the word base budget, that includes your entire budget. I know in this instance, it does not for water because of these fluctuations that are outside of our control. But every department that is presented so far, your base budget is your entire budget.
Mayor, Councilmember Goforth, that is correct. That is their base. There are other things that we take a look at, like life cycle, things that go into their operating, we take that out too. So
Okay.
for instance, we have for DO IT, or Department of Innovation and Technology,
Hey, Counselor, quickly,
So
can I
that's
just say?
what's confusing to
Yeah,
me.
so overall, and at 2%, we could spend a lot of time talking about how that's derived. Ultimately, we had a goal, right, overall for the city to accomplish an overall savings, right? Because it's ultimately, it ends up being a number that we're looking for
Oh, so that- and you
in the
back-
future.
and-
And the background for me, right, it's like, we started, and I think we shared back in March, the goal to the council was $9.2 million. That came represented, we looked at that came, then we translated that, said, that's about 2%. Now, as we're going through this with some of the departments, you'll notice there were some departments we didn't take in decreases from, because we're like, it's just not gonna work, right? There wasn't something to do there. So, but overall, we ended up saving a little over $11 million. Well, I say saving, let's say, the net impact between savings and there was some additional revenues, for example, in permitting, right? We saw a higher level of activity than what we had budgeted, so we added additional revenues into that formula. So at the end of the day, the bottom line, from 9.2, we've accomplished a little over $11 million. Now, is it uniformly applied across the whole city? That's how we started from, but you can't do budgeting
That's
that
helpful.
way, right?
Absolutely.
You're looking at every circumstance, some of these departments, and it doesn't, you could, but it's not, helping the city move along. And so we're weighing all those things. For example, the best example I can give you is fleet. Well, if we cut fleet by 2%, then that's going to impact solid waste, it's going to impact police, it's going to impact all, everybody else that has it. So we're like, okay, no, we need to stabilize them and make sure they can get, our more concern is, can they turn around the cars and get the fleet out the door, because that's what's important. So we end up managing the process. We start with the 2%, but we manage the process to get to that 9.2, and we're able to get to 11.
That's helpful. Briefly describe how you came to the 9.2.
So again, we looked at that forecast. When we looked at it, I can't remember if it was year 3 or 4, well, that's where we saw the delta between current revenues and ongoing, it was an ongoing impact of a deficit for the city, or under what we were spending above what was coming in. So we said, okay, that's a structural imbalance. We need to try to solve for that. So let's work on that now. And that's where the 9.2 was our goal. And really what we're trying to affect, as I told the council, is it's not for next year, right? We're making decisions today to solve for that 4th year. And that's why it's 2%, but it's only 2%, right? Because we're seeing that there is a challenge. There's a imbalance in our revenues coming in and what we're spending. A lot of it has to do with forces outside the city. So, but we're saying, well, we need to be smart about this. Let's start adjusting. And the 2% was kind of, well, the 9.2 came, I asked Brian, come back and tell me what 9.2% or 9.2 million is equivalent to in savings. And that's where the 2%. So we didn't start at the 2%. We started at the 9 million, and that's how we got there.
And remind me, year 3, you saw the dip. Tell me that gap you just mentioned. What is that again?
Well,
You
it just
said
becomes where we get below the reserves that we talked about earlier today, where it's dropping below where we typically, is below the 10%. It gets below that number.
Oh, is it in year
that
3? I
fourth
thought it
year.
was 5.
So yeah, Mayor,
Okay.
Councilmember Goforth, we drop below our 8% in year 5, but be able to manage that and
We gotta
plan
make
for
that-
that, we did
Okay.
the year 4 and said, okay, to be able to bring that back up, let's solve for year 4 of the 9.2 because it's negative. And then with that, the ongoing would help boost that 5th year up. So we wanted to plan for that. And that is, just to remind council, that was the general governmental fund, was the 9.2 million. As the utilities, they have their own fund, but we did it across the board. Even the utility fund needed some reduction. So we did that exercise with the utility fund too to help support that fund.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Adams?
Thank you, Mayor. I don't want to go down an accounting rabbit hole here, but I just have a couple of comments. And I'll preface them by saying I'm used to a non-governmental world. So I'm wondering, and I appreciate, Chris, you explaining where that 2% came from. I'm just wondering why it was 2%, why not 5, why not 7.5, whatever. But I'm wondering why See, what I'm used to is a situation where, we'll call it the board of directors, which in this case is the city council, doesn't say, we want a 10% reduction. Now you go figure out where it is, or we want a 5% reduction. It just seems to me that policy is coming up and not going down. And I'm just gonna leave that as a comment for further conversation later in this whole budget process. But I'm just wondering, is that common in the governmental world? Because the world I come from, the board says to me, I work for a board. And they say to me, we want you to cut expenses by 10%. Now it's my job to go figure it out, or 5, or whatever. I'm not debating the number. I'm just wondering how the process
So, yeah,
works
so,
like
yeah, so that's why we had the conversation back in March, right? That's why we brought to council and said, here's how things look going out into the future. And what we're concerned about in those years 4 and 5, where we're getting below the fiscal standards, the principles we have, that the reserve is drawing down. So we suggested to the council, we're going to move forward. From that point forward, we are moving forward with a discussion with the departments about reducing the budget by 2%. And that was the conversation, because the goal was to get to a balanced budget in year 4 and 5. And the council said, I think what we took from that is the council saw that as a goal. If the council just on a whim just wants to say, well, we want to do even better than that, and we want 10%, that's the direction we would expect to get at the beginning of the year. And so that's the opportunity. That's why we have these conversations, is to set the goals. We're telling you, based on information, based on facts, here's where we stand financially, and making sure the council understands what our purpose is, our objective is here. And that's the opportunity for the council to say, well, no, that's too much, or no, you need to do more because we want a stronger reserve in 5 years from now.
But it was presented as 2% across the board, and now when we come back, it's, well, this is exempt, there's adjustments here. So I'm not sure we've heard a presentation with a budget that is less for 25, 26 than 24, 25.
Wait, what? Well, it's not. We're actually, yes, we said 2%. If the council wants to say, irregardless of the department, we're going to take our 2% from you, regardless of the fact that we found $11 million versus $9 million, we can go back to all those departments, says it doesn't matter, we're going to take 2% from you. But what I'm telling you is the way we manage this process is there's some departments, if you take that 2%, it has a reciprocal effect on police. Police now will not get cars out on the street. We're already concerned about how long it takes to turn around the new vehicles and getting on. So those are the judgments we make as management to say, we're still going to accomplish the fiscal goal of having the savings that we need in year 4 and 5, but we're not just going to, we start that way, right? We don't go to the department and say, well, you're not going to go through the exercise. We want everybody to go through the exercise of reductions, right? And that went through that process, and we realized some of the cuts, because it's never a good idea just to be a blanket 2% across the board. That's great management. That's easy. We won't have to make any decision. We'll just live with the consequences. Nobody does that, right? That's not good management. We look at it and say, there's opportunities where if we took 2% from some departments, it would have a reciprocal effect on services and supporting those departments. We still understood the goal was still important to get down to make those savings in those out years. And we believe we've made a lot of progress in getting there. Now, along the way, right when we were presenting, we got hit with the increased labor cost, which wasn't in our original anticipation. So it's put a lot of pressure on us on the back end, but we've gotten pretty close to our goals. But if council wants to say, this isn't enough, we want more, then you saw what is going to happen. And the challenge is, where does public safety play in that, right? Because if it's not public safety, then it's 70% of your budget is public safety, and you want to make up all the savings outside of it, then it's dramatic, right? It's not a subtle change of just taking vacant positions. One of the caveats they give all the departments is, you can cut the 2%, but we're not doing layoffs. We're doing 2%. We can find 2% without laying off. We're not being federal government. We're not walking into departments and saying, half of you are gone, get out of here by the end of the week. We don't do business that way. what we do is we try to be more efficient. We look for savings. We look for vacancies. There was not going to be layoffs. So that's the approach we've taken, and that's what we presented to you when we presented the proposed budget.
If I could follow up, I'm trying to better understand the process here, so I'm not wanting to get down in the weeds and question that, but thank you for that clarification, because now that I think back to that point in March, what you're saying, make sure I understand you, Chris, that is the point in time where you would have looked for direction from this council to say, well, okay, we like that, or maybe we think you ought to sharpen the pencil. So I'm not trying to open up a debate on this. I'm trying to understand the process, how it historically has gotten to the point that it is, and what you were looking for in March.
And I think this is
appreciate that.
So by the city charter, the city manager is required to present a proposed budget to the city. So we did that on April, whatever day that was. We presented to council the city manager's proposed budget. That's the responsibility by charter. The city manager is responsible for presenting a budget. From that point till now through the first week in May, we're presenting that proposed budget in detail. The council, and that's what we hope, is from all these discussions, all these hours, is we're getting your feedback on, your impressions about the budget, more or less, a lot of great clarification questions, follow-ups. That's what we're doing. In the past, this is where we hear from council says, typically, we want more of that, right? We're interested in seeing more police officers, more fire stations, more whatever. And then we try to figure out, well, can we absorb that in the budget and what we're doing? So this is the chance, because when we get to the end, we're taking all the feedback we're getting from council, and a lot of it's been very good because it's been a lot of follow-up. Like, can you clarify why that program is being cut, or what was the analysis? And so we're doing that. But when we get to May, the assumption is unless we hear from council between now and then, this is the direction, is what the proposed budget has been presented to you as is.
I would just follow up. My last follow-up would be, when you did present, I did raise the concern that the forecast goes below the policy, that it forecasts out. I raised that then. I still have that concern. That hasn't been, I've discussed it, but for me, that's a concern, why you would forecast out below what your policy is for your reserve.
Right. And Councilman, I think we answered that question, that in that fifth year, we can go back and actually show the history that that's been the case, because it's just putting a lot of pressure on how good is our forecast, right? And the fact is, well, do you take more cuts now, but then find out 2-3 years from now, you didn't really need to do that. And so when it's dramatically low and the trends are significantly, trends are going down, that's what concerns us. And that's why you're seeing us try to make those adjustments now, so we can mitigate against kind of that downward slope, knowing that we didn't quite solve in the fifth year, but we made improvements. And I've told the council and I've told the staff, it's not something I would like to leave with you, but I think you're going to have to consider doing this again. But if you're doing it in these increments, I think it gives the departments opportunities to think about it for the next coming year and opportunities to make more adjustments. It's probably maybe 1 more year, 2 more years, but you can see we've already started changing that gap between what's coming in and what's being spent. So I think that's good. The city will grow, we'll see that positive improvement continually with this proposed budget and subsequent proposed budgets.
Mr. Heredia.
Yeah, I think just put it in context. This is, I think, why we do it every year, right? We look at these costs, the budget every year. And in my 7+ years here in council, the ending reserve, I feel like we're very conservative, because every ending year reserve fund is in the high 20s, low 30s, right? And so I think that's the importance. I think the philosophy of looking out 5 years is important to adjust incrementally. Like many of our other neighbors that might not have the same philosophy, that are doing 100% rate utility increases and major rate increases for the residents. I think for us, looking at every year, looking at how we can adjust those numbers, because we have to look at the services that we're providing now, right? Because that's what the residents expect. So it's just the exercise of every year, looking at how we can adjust incrementally, I think helps identifying what we need to do now for the future, but that's why we look every year. And again, point out, 7+ years I've been on council, ending reserves have been high 20s to low 30s. So I think the city has done a good job in identifying these changes early on to how then, depending on, 5 years from now, looking at how we can keep on adjusting or maybe reducing in the future, but just
Ms.
a comment
Billsbury.
there.
A similar comment to what Councilor Hardia just said. I wanted to also express my trust in the process and my appreciation. I didn't know a budget presentation could get me emotional, but are we surprised? As I listened to Mr. Brady say what he did, it got me emotional, because I really appreciate that our employees can know that someone's got their back. Like he said, we're not just going to go in and start firing people if we don't need to and laying people off. And I think that it's all done very conservatively. I think that I'm in my 5th year, and we've, like Frankie said, we've seen this every single year. And it's so good that we look ahead and that we're preparing for worst case scenario. But I like that we're not overly making cuts. I mean, we're still having to make hard cuts. I'm still in pain over that Parks and Rec budget. We have to make hard decisions still on some of these cuts, but it's important to what the members of our community, the services we provide them, our employees' quality of life, like all of those things matter. And I really, really appreciate how much work goes into this by every department, and really, really thoughtful of how this will affect the people in our city, and where it makes sense to make the cuts and where it doesn't. And I really appreciate that. And it's okay for us to all have questions and to push you guys on some of those things, right? But I do want to just express how much I appreciate the work that goes into this, because it's hard and it's difficult, but I think we've done an incredible, incredible job in the past and currently continue to do so.
Ms. Duff?
Yeah, I'd like to also make the comment that we are faced with sudden revenue cuts to our budget. This isn't a gradual thing with a cut that the state has imposed through the flat income tax and the rental sales tax. So here we have a sudden cut. We knew it was coming, but it's a huge amount coming to our city. And we've got to figure out a way to gracefully handle it without us making severe cuts. If we want to make severe cuts, okay, we'll have to look at people. We want to be competitive, and we have to look at our level of services. Many other cities are taking some revenue adjustments through sales tax or other revenues to try to supplement this, because it is hard for every city right now that we're a growing area. We have growing capital needs. We have growing public safety needs. Everything is a growing need, and we are contracting our budget, which is kind of on the opposite of when you follow economics. And if there's a recession, usually there's a contraction of less people coming here, there's a contraction of growth. There is no growth. And so when you look at your revenues, it's a little easier but we're combating growth with a cut at the same time, and they're imposing directions. I think it's a very difficult situation that we're in. And I think we're making the best of it and trying to go forward and making that analysis year by year. And doing it in a gradual way. Thank goodness we have some reserves above our target reserves that are helping us doing it more gracefully. I think it's going to help us in the long run that we're able to provide the services that we need and, the personnel we need for those services.
Thank you. Hearing no other comments, you're excused. Thank you for the conversation. Next, we'll move over to item 2B, or 2C, presentation on solid waste budget. Well, we can start. Sherry, would you like to go ahead and start?
Want to go and get started?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. We're going to start.
Good morning, Mayor, Council. My name is Sherry Collins, and I'm the Solid Waste Director. And with me today, I have Joe Giudice, and he's the Deputy Solid Waste Director. And we're here to present our fiscal year 25-26 budget. Before I get started, though, I want to make sure I give a shout out to the men and women of the Solid Waste Department that work so hard every day to make sure that we're successful. And I also want to give a shout out to the Fleet Services Department to, say thank you for everything that they do to make sure that our equipment's up and running every day so we can complete our job. And because of those great people and the work that they do, we're able to fulfill our public purpose, which is to protect the public health and the environment by ensuring the sanitary handling of solid waste to keep our community clean, safe, and welcoming. Now, I want to get into what our priorities and objectives are. We continue to focus on three main priorities and objectives, which are long-term materials management, operational excellence, and employee investment and engagement. So regarding long-term materials management, last year we brought to you our disposal contracts. It was just before the beginning of this year, and there were some increases in those contracts. Those were 5-year contracts, and so those contracts are going to be good through the calendar year of 2029. So one thing that we have to do is make sure that we're always looking forward into the future to make sure that we're always looking for future opportunities and making sure that we ensure competitive pricing. The other thing that we continue to work on is the design of the MRF. We've talked about it in the past. The 15% design has been completed, but there's still more work to be done. We're still working in partnership with the town of Gilbert, and they have a consultant study out right now that's being completed. So once we completed the 15% design, we have to make sure that we still vet it out even more. This project is going to take a long time. It's very expensive, so we need to put a lot of time into it to make sure it's really the direction that we want to go. As far as operational excellence, as you know, we've struggled with truck availability recently. While that has gotten better, we are not out of the weeds yet, so we just need to continue. We have gotten several trucks in last year and, the first few months of this year, but we need to continue to focus on our fleet so that we continue to have a fleet that is able to run and operate. The other thing that we're very excited about is last year we brought to you a project to put tablet-based systems into our trucks. So go digital and go from paper to have real-time data, more efficient routes. We are so excited to say that we were actually able to kick off a live version of that for a small portion of our operation this week, and so far it's going great. We have a lot of great feedback from the operators and from our supervisors, so we're really excited to kick that off and to see what that can bring to our organization for efficiencies. And then as far as employee investment, kind of like Water was saying, we had a lot of vacancies. We filled those vacancies, but it's left us with a young workforce. And so we have a large portion of our workforce out there that has been here less than 2 years. And for us, that's a young workforce. And so we just need to continue to focus on the onboarding and ongoing training with those employees. One area I also want to highlight is last year we brought to you the extension of hours to our hazardous materials facility. And so what we did is in July of this year, we extended those hours by 2 hours per day. And so we are now open, instead of 7 to 12, we're open from 7 to 2. That has been very successful. And basically what this chart is showing you that from the hours of 11 to 2 is our busiest hours. But we still have a great deal of traffic between the new hours of 12 to 2. And actually 30% of the customers are coming in between the hours of 12 to 2. It's also pretty exciting because January of this year, of 2025, was our busiest month in the entire time the facility has been open. We don't do any advertising. It just keeps getting more and more popular, and it's a phenomenal facility. Mike Baez runs that facility down there and takes great pride, and he just does an amazing job. So this has been a really successful endeavor.
Remind me, where is that?
It's at 2412 North Center Street.
District 1, by the way.
Right.
That's a 25-minute drive.
And we don't do marketing on it because we don't want more, or what, I mean, we're just overwhelmed with the people? We don't want too many people to come, or what? Why don't we do marketing on it?
Right now, we don't do any marketing on it. It's just essentially on our website. I mean, if we did do marketing on it and advertising on it, we would have to be prepared for the influx of that.
Okay.
So if that's something we'd want to do, we'd have to plan for that.
Because I do think it's something that is a huge service that whenever people find out about it, they're like, what? No way, I didn't know
Right.
that. And then they use it, right? Like, so
Right.
I mean, I would love to see it get bigger, but I don't know what the costs are on that. So,
Right.
yeah.
It's this balance of.
Yeah.
This works now. We could probably, I don't know what our capacity is, Sherry, but it is a drive for some parts. You know, our long-term vision would be, we'd love to have one other parts of the city. But the reason we got to this is that we used to advertise and have these big events, and they became so popular. The lines were backing up into the streets, and so it's just this kind of balance of trying to have the service available if someone needs to use it, and the word of mouth seems to be working really well. If we promoted it, it could be, we're trying to maintain the customer service, right? We don't want to overwhelm it, but ultimately, I think we'd love to expand the program somewhere else in the city.
Yeah, we would love to.
You take lithium-ion batteries as part of this?
Yes.
Yeah. And the reason I bring that up is, and why we might want to advertise this a little bit, is that those lithium-ion batteries are causing all the major fires that you're seeing throughout the valley, because people just throw them out into the trash, then they get run over by a truck, and then they catch fire, and you see a 5-alarm fire. And so, I mean, that costs a lot of money too. That uses a lot of water too, to put those out. So properly disposing of things like that is, saves the environment, saves water, saves money. So I think there's some value in advertising this a little bit more.
To the Vice Mayor's comments, I recently took a bunch of old dead power tool battery cartridges down there, and the line was really efficient. And then I went through the swap shop and picked up some cool stuff.
Back more than you.
Yeah, I did. I did. And I think, I just want to, that swap shop is a wonderful community asset. It takes usable paints and chemicals, and for those that need them, why not? It saves having to dispose of them, I think. But I think it's a great asset, and the people down there, the times I've been, are just completely great customer service. So as well as real quickly, your refuse truck operators, I've not run into one that is not professional, polite. They go out of their way to do things, and so kudos.
Yeah, thank you. I'll definitely pass that on.
I think there's a small fee that we pay in our utilities for the household hazardous waste facility. I forget the cent, it's in cents, but if we wanted to increase that fee to increase the capacity of the HHW, that would be an option for us to review in the future. But it's a really great asset to take things out of the landfill, recycle them, and put them somewhere else.
Right, Mayor.
Location is really ideal for where it sits, it's not around residential areas and things like that. So.
As mentioned, that's in District 1.
Yeah, it's nowhere close to my residential neighborhood, but that's a 45-minute drive.
Well, it's better than a fire at your home with your lithium batteries.
That's what I'm saying, I'd like it closer.
Okay. Sherry?
Okay, and then we'll go ahead and move on to our next topic.
Good luck.
I'm Joe Giudice. Good morning, Mayor. Good morning, council members. Pleasure to be here with you this morning. Just a couple of quick follow-ups on the HHM. We do have a plan for doing some advertising. We just wanted to hold off till after the new hours were implemented, and we saw the impacts of that because we didn't want to overwhelm our exceptional service that we provide there. So I think that's an opportunity to execute. And with respect to the lithium-ion batteries, Vice Mayor, we did partner with multiple Valley cities on an advertising campaign about lithium-ion batteries, proper disposal of those, using your household hazardous waste facility. So we really look for opportunities to jointly advertise. In the solid waste community, we very much partner as cities to work together because we want to avoid confusing messaging across city boundaries. Okay, so safety is also a top priority for us, and I'd like to share with you one of the metrics that we measure. This is related to employee safety in particular, and we have this formulaic accounting we do for OSHA recordable work-related injuries. What's important to note here, we're showing a trend line here. What's important to note here is the industry standard for solid waste collections is over 4. And so we've maintained ourselves below that, I shouldn't say industry standard, I should say industry average. And we will continue to monitor this, track this, and maintain investments in our safety programs to keep our employees safe.
What are the key nature of the
Injuries.
So for this particular metric, it would be a work-related injury that would result in some type of lost time away from work. Could be a modified work, could be...
Back, ankles, what is it? Is it a little bit of everything?
It can be, sometimes it's shoulder, a back, twisted ankle, stepping out of the truck. Those are examples of types of
It is a mix of everything.
We had a budget item a few weeks ago that we're buying bulk, I think it was boots at the time. So we're providing the safety equipment, gloves, boots, goggles, vests, anything, making sure that our employees are actually utilizing those. They're getting the right boots, wearing the proper equipment is important because that impacts our budget as well, impacts family lives. So I want to make sure that our folks are staying as safe as possible.
Yeah, Mayor, Vice Mayor, we have an extensive personal protective equipment program of which we're providing safety shoes, vests, bump caps or hard hats, all types of gear to ensure our employees' safety. Okay, so now I'd like to get into a high-level summary of our department's budget. The column to the left kind of represents our major business process areas. And what I'd like to note for you is if you look down to the third line of collection services, you'll note that the vast majority of our budget expenditures are in our collection services, which is logical, obviously. That's what we are mostly doing. And it's like 90% of our budgeted expenditures. And then not noted on the slide, but important to keep in back of mind is there are really 3 driving categories of expenses for a solid waste utility. It is our fleet maintenance expenses from an operating side. It is our personnel, our amazing workforce that's out there doing the work every day. And then for the city of Mesa, it is our disposal costs or the costs we pay through contracted vendors to bring the materials, whether it's the recyclables or the compost or the trash, to be properly handled in a safe and secure place. And that's really representing a large portion of our expenses. So the year-end actuals column is representing last year's actual spending in those various categories. The next line is our budget for this year. The next column represents what we're forecasting to spend for the remainder of the year, end up at the end of the year, and then our proposed budget for next year. And in the collection services line, you'll notice that the proposed budget has an increase of about $2 million. So it is really those categories that I just touched on. It is landfill costs, it is fleet maintenance costs, and it's a little bit of personnel that's making up the majority of that change in funding. As you had significant discourse about moments ago, all the departments have worked on being creative about how to come up with some either revenue enhancements or budget reductions. For the solid waste department, we put our thinking caps on and identified 2 revenue enhancements. One, council approved earlier this year in 2025, we had an extension of our agreement with Mesa Public Schools for an additional 20 years. Proud to serve them, proud of that partnership. In renegotiating those terms of that deal, there's some additional revenue of $168,000 per year. Another line here, barrel audit. So this is just a really good practice for any solid waste utility. It's essentially making sure that our levels of service, how many barrels we're out there serving, aligns with what customers are paying for. And so we are forecasting $150,000 upon completion of that audit in additional revenue. And that's based on, we've done these audits in the past, so we have some pretty good sense for what the audit results will result in. And then the final area is a reduction. We've, for the most part, completed our transition to compressed natural gas for our fleet. We have pretty good eyes now on what our budget is and what our actual spending is in our fuel for compressed natural gas. And we see an opportunity to reduce that line item by $50,000 and still have capacity to handle our fuel needs. And I think I'm going to turn it back over to Sherry.
Okay, thank you. So just to clarify, in Mesa Public Schools, it's between the past IG and the current one, it's a total of 20, but the new one is a 10-year agreement. So I just wanted to clarify that it wasn't another 20, it's just another 10. But in addition to what Joe just talked about, these revenues, additional revenues and savings, we've also been looking at our operation and seeing how we can modify some of our services to reduce the pressures of our rates in the future. Some of those ideas that we've come up with and we'd like to bring back to you in the fall is looking at the frequency of some of our collection and then some routing options. So I just will be bringing some of that back to you in the fall. The last thing that we want to talk about is some proposed fees and charges. Chris and Mr. Brady were talking about a little bit earlier, some one-time fees structured to cover additional cost incurred to services. And solid waste has those fees. And so we're proposing to increase this multifamily solid waste residential development fee. Again, it's the one-time fee. For buildings with 2 to 4 units, we're proposing to increase the fee to $109. We wanted to be really conservative with our revenue estimates. This is a smaller portion of the developments that come through, and because it is impacted and driven by development, we wanted to be conservative in our revenue estimate of $15,000. So, and with that, that concludes it. So if you have any questions.
Vice Mayor?
Do I remember correctly, the city competes with the private solid waste haulers for multifamily contracts?
Yes, Mayor, Vice Mayor, we do. So we compete with private sector for multifamily and commercial. The way that it is identified in the Senate bill that was passed in 2019 is if the structure has 5 or more units, it will be open for competition. So if the structure has between 2 and 4, it is not open for competition.
Okay. That took care of that question. Thank you. Well done.
Mr. Adams?
You mentioned the barrel audit, and I think that's a good idea. Is that 150, is that net of the cost to perform the audit, or is there a cost to perform it?
Mayor, Councilmember Adams, there is a cost to perform it, but it is minimal compared to that. I don't have it right now, but essentially we go out and we count the barrels, but then the $150,000 is ongoing.
Okay, so that's not a huge number. Okay, I'm just curious. Thank you. I think it's a good idea.
Thank you.
Okay.
On the proposed multifamily, what's the existing fee?
Mayor, Councilmember, go forth. The existing fee is $62, so we're proposing to go to $109.
Okay. Thank you.
Anything else, council? All right, then. You kind of got off easy.
You're either worn out or we did a great job.
Okay, thank you.
You bet. Well, I just, council, I think there's been some great discussion here, and I just made some notes, and you've heard me say this before. We're a full-service city. We provide everything our residents want, and for $2,200 a year, we're very frugal, and we do an extremely good job. And I know we feel like, and we can discuss this later, that I think we're really lucky to have a great reserve fund that we can draw down, and I don't consider it a structural imbalance financially. I feel that in order to bring the deltas together over the next several years, we're going to have to draw down out of our reserve fund at the tune of $53 million. We had some unknown hits that happened between the rental, the income, as well as the cost for public safety. But I was trying to reflect back. Some of us were during the COVID time, Mr. Brady. I think we had to make some serious financial changes there too to compensate for the loss of income and still provide the same services we're talking about today. And as council, we've had to weather some of the storms, and I know that we can weather it. But I don't feel we're overspending. We're coming to, again, bring this structural financial to some type of neutrality here in the next couple of years. What I like about, we can see this every year. We see our budget every year. And in fact, if council wants to move forward, we've given some direction at the 2%. If next year we want to go 2 to 4 to 5%, that could happen. And if we get done with this and we find like, we want to make some more decision-making and maybe find some more budget area to cut, then we can give that direction at the end of this budget session. But I know that would be hard to do.
I feel like it's sometimes, it's kind of like, well, if the city management and budget didn't really have try to use these 5-year forecasts, and not a lot of cities do this, right? And we just showed you 3 years. You think, okay, 3 years budget. We'd all be going, man, life's good. There's some trends that need to be adjusted, but we throw a 5-year out there. I mean, think about that. How many places, and you're trying to commit to that 5th year. And understanding, think about all the changes that took place in the last 24 months that impacted our budget, right? It was significant. So, and it can go either way. We've had years right after COVID, we thinking, oh my goodness, the economy. We had a construction boom in Mesa, right? We saw tremendous revenues come in. So it was kind of the opposite. We were hunkering down for this, big change. And so I think it's wise to have a 5-year forecast. I think you need to consider it as a tool, a planning tool for the future, to look out and see what's coming, but recognizing every year you're going to have the same opportunity to look out. Year 5 will become year 4, and you see how it's performing. So I think you're right, Mayor. I think every year, that's what we do. We evaluate and look at this. And I will say, I don't know if there's been too many years where the 5th year has always been perfectly what we wanted. I don't think it ever has been. But every year, the next year that you're actually approving the budget for, you're only approving the budget not for year 5, but for next year. If you look on the books, you look what that looks like, it's a pretty solid budget. So,
thank you. With that, let's move over to item 3. That's acknowledged receipt of minutes for the Economic Development Advisory Board. Have a motion from Vice Mayor and Ms. Spilsbury. All in favor say aye. Aye. Motion passes. Next is current events and conferences attended. I know we've had a busy week and a half. Who would like to?
There's a ton of stuff. I don't know how much time we can spend on it.
Well, so it's your call. Julie, why don't you start us out?
All right, I'm just going to list a whole bunch of things off.
Go ahead.
Sorry if I say your stuff.
If you say it, we won't say it.
Okay. Several of us went and supported the Lokahi Teams Carnival out at Dobson High School. Appreciate their work they do in our community for their opening ceremony. I was able to participate on a panel at ASU on politics and policy careers on Friday morning. Saturday, most of us also were at the incredible ribbon cutting for our Read Runner at Celebrate Mesa, and that was amazing. I was super excited about that. Thank you to all of the many, many staff that participated in Celebrate Mesa.
Let's not forget the MORE van.
And the MORE van, which stands for, I already forgot what it stands for. Something recreational experience.
Outdoor recreation.
More outdoor recreation experiences.
Mesa Outdoor. Is it
Mesa
more?
Outdoor Recreation
Mesa Outdoor
Experiences.
Recreation Experience. The MORE van, which is also super cool. So, and people can add to Celebrate Mesa if you want.
Named
And
after
then,
Andrea. Oh, wish she's not here.
and then yesterday was very full. We had Councilmember Goforth and Councilmember Duff and I rode our bikes to work with a bunch of people. It was really fun. Not from our homes. Well, Jen rode from her home, but and then we also had our wellness center ribbon cutting, which was amazing. Thank you to our city management for making that happen. Such a great thing right here through the neighborhood. And then we had our Mayor's Youth Committee graduation last night. 35 students graduated from Mayor's Youth Committee. Several of us attended the LDS Easter pageant at the Mesa Temple, and that continues through Saturday night. It's free, starts at 8 p.m. It's a great activity for this week leading up to Easter. And then I have to mention my Easter breakfast is on Saturday morning. So I hope to see all of you there with your kids and grandkids or neighbor kids or whoever you want to bring. The firefighters will be making our pancakes 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. and the Easter egg hunt is at 9, and there's bounce houses and crafts from the Idea Museum and petting zoo. Super fun. Thanks.
Okay. Ms. Duff.
That was a good job, Julie. I'll just add a couple of things. Mesa Community College had a 60th anniversary celebration of the Community College Performing Arts Center, and we watched the play Sister Act. And let me tell you, it was phenomenal. It was very professional. It was a great play. I'm very impressed with what the community college does in their arts program. And I will throw in there that this weekend, it is Easter weekend. Downtown has an Easter extravaganza at 10 a.m. and out here in City Plaza. So I'll see you there.
Any others? Mr. Adams.
I apologize if I've already mentioned this. I don't think I have. About a week and a half ago, I had the opportunity to go speak to Cub Pack 653. They wanted someone to talk about. They wanted an elected official, and they drew me. So we talked about public service. We talked about volunteerism in the community, and then one young man said, how do they go about naming streets in Mesa? And I looked at him, I said, I haven't the slightest idea, but I'll find out for you. And the transportation, I forget who, but someone was able to provide me the materials, and I sent that on to his mom, and it got distributed amongst the Cubs. So thank you very much to transportation for that. So, but it was wonderful. I think that it was good to be able to talk about getting involved in the community and the impact you can make when you do that. So that was it. You don't think, I didn't read it.
You don't want
I don't
to.
read it. I
You
just
don't want
sent
to
it
get
on.
in that business.
It's a process.
Yeah.
I'll have you come speak.
Yeah, no, sure.
So I attended all the events mentioned earlier, along with the Asian Corporate and Entrepreneur Leadership's 19th anniversary over at our Asian district. Spoke at Mountain View High School National Honor Society induction. That was a great thing. Took a tour of Mesa Gateway Airport, took a tour of the Mesa Municipal Court, and there is a new mural on the west side of our MAC Center, by the way.
Health Center?
So with that,
Health
pardon?
Center?
No, a mural for the MAC
No,
Center.
the ribbon cutting at the Health Center.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, did you get it?
She-
Okay, I missed
She mentioned that, yeah.
I faded out.
So with that, Mr. Brady, can you share future meetings?
Yeah, it's just, the momentum continues with budget. So the next council meeting will be Monday, April 21st. So we'll begin early at 4:30 p.m. and for the study session with the council meeting beginning at 5:45. Thank you.
Great. We'll have a council photo after this, and I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Thank you, Mr. Summers. Thank you, Mr. Adams. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
We're adjourned.